His father built the largest criminal empire in South American history. It lasted 45 minutes against 11 people who loved each other. Dante Reyes watched it fall from 30 meters away, and the thing that would change everything. The thing that would take 3 years and 47 infrastructure projects and a notebook filled with names was not the falling. It was what he saw standing in the wreckage. The water settled in 4 minutes and 23 seconds. Dante knew this because he reviewed the surveillance footage 11 days later, in a rented apartment in Ipanema with the curtains drawn and a glass of water he hadn't touched. Salt air came through the gap in the curtains. The city noise came through it too, indifferent, without awareness of what had ended on one of its bridges an hour ago. The apartment held the stillness of rooms where grief has been refused entry, not absent, just denied a chair. He watched himself the way a coach watched game film, not with grief, not with the horror of watching his father die, but with the precise diagnostic attention of someone who understood that those 4 minutes and 23 seconds were the most important of his life. He was not in shock on that bridge. He was diagnosing. The smoke came first, heavy, chemical, black with burning petroleum and river water, rising from the Guanabara in columns that bent east with the afternoon wind. The vault had gone down fast. His father's Porsche had gone down with it. The water received both without opinion, the indifference of something that had been absorbing the city's output for centuries. Then Dom and Brian surfaced. Dante watched them pull each other out, 2 men running on the residual chemistry of maximum effort and narrow survival, holding each other upright in the shallows. He watched Vince, bleeding badly from the bridge sequence, receive treatment from Mia before anyone else thought to move. He watched Roman and Han arrive at the riverbank. He watched Tej run a systems check on the disabled vehicles with the efficiency of someone for whom technical assessment was the natural response to emotional extremity. 11 people moved toward each other without a word of instruction. His father had died 60 meters away with no one holding his hand. Dante stood at the railing for 4 minutes and 23 seconds and did the math. The math was not complicated. It was simply the hardest equation he had ever run, because its inputs required him to look at his father clearly, which was the thing his father had spent Dante's entire life preventing. Hernan Reyes had built the largest criminal infrastructure in South American history. He had controlled Rio's port, its construction contracts, its political class, its police. $800 million across 22 years of methodical, intelligent work. By every measurable metric, an extraordinary operator. His empire had lasted 45 minutes against 11 people who loved each other. Not 11 government agents. Not 11 armed professionals. 11 people who had gathered around a table in Los Angeles at some quiet, uncelebrated moment and made a choice to hold each other's weight. Their loyalty was not purchased. Not coerced. Not conditional on outcome. When Vince was bleeding on the bridge, no one calculated whether helping him served their operational objective. They helped him. Dante watched this from the railing with the attention he gave to things that were both deeply painful and deeply instructive. His father had built with fear. Fear contracted people, made them perform when supervised, scatter when the supervision disappeared. He had watched his father's men scatter in real time that afternoon. The moment the tactical situation exceeded the threat of consequence, they simply stopped. Dom Toretto had built with something else entirely. Something that did the opposite of contracting. Something that expanded people until they were capable of more than they had understood themselves to be. Dante did not yet have a word for it. He turned from the railing. A surveillance camera on the underside of the bridge's eastern span captured him in profile at the 4-minute and 23rd-second mark. A 28-year-old man in a suit the river water had not reached, standing still while everything around him was chaos. Looking not at the water but at the road ahead. He walked to his car, he drove to the apartment. He ordered food he didn't eat and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. He wrote 2 words at the top of the first page. The technology. Then he began to write underneath it. He spent 3 months in Rio before he moved. Not underground, not hiding. His personal legal exposure was negligible, and he had no intention of performing guilt he didn't feel for crimes he hadn't committed. He walked the city openly. He rode the metro. He ate at restaurants his father had considered beneath the family's dignity. He walked the favelas, not from a car window, not through the mediated distance of his father's logistics briefings. On foot, in clothes that didn't announce money. At the pace of someone who had come to understand rather than to be seen. He walked Rocinha and Vidigal and the Complexo do Alamo and the hillside communities above Santa Teresa. He walked them in morning heat and afternoon rain, and the coolness of evenings when the wind came off the water and the city released some fraction of what it had been holding since dawn, the air carrying salt and green hillside vegetation and wood smoke from cooking fires above the tree line. He walked until the geography stopped being abstract and became specific. Until each community had a face rather than a demographic profile. What he found was a city inside a city that the outer city had decided to manage through neglect. Water systems in various states of partial repair for 4 years, because the municipal contracts ran through the political infrastructure his father had controlled, and his father had controlled it through leverage rather than service. Schools with 60 children to a classroom. Teachers who arrived anyway every day because the children were there. Medical clinics staffed by rotating volunteers filling the gap left by infrastructure that had been promised and never built. He saw what his father had taken and never replaced. This was the accounting that mattered. Not the $800 million. The decades of extracted capital from communities that had built nothing around them because nothing had been built for them. Because the man who held the territory had preferred leverage to investment. Dante sat in a plastic chair in a community center in the Complexo do Alamo on a Tuesday afternoon and wrote in his notebook for 3 hours. He wrote about what he'd seen. He wrote about what was missing. At the top of a new page he wrote, "What we're building." He did not yet have names. He had a principle. The principle was sufficient to begin. The cafe in Botafogo smelled of dark roast and fresh bread from an oven that had been running since 6. The domestic smell of a neighborhood that had been conducting its own affairs, regardless of what the political class was doing, for decades. Marco Cavalcanti arrived with 3 folders and the wariness of a man who had been through enough funding conversations to carry disappointment in advance. He had been trying to build a water treatment system for a hillside community of 14,000 people for 4 years. The technical design was sound. 2 years of graduate work refined for this specific terrain, this specific geology, this specific community. The problem was the approval process, which required sign-off from a municipal official whose discretionary authority had been a purchase item in his father's protection arrangement. The arrangement was dissolved. The official was waiting to see who would reassemble it. Nobody was going to reassemble it. Dante read all 3 folders without interruption. He asked 4 questions, all technical, all precise: soil composition at the installation site, pressure differentials in the distribution pipe network, maintenance accessibility of the filtration components, load tolerance at the primary junction point. Marco answered with increasing precision and decreasing wariness, because the questions were the questions of someone who had actually read the folders. "One condition," Dante said. Marco looked at him. "Excellent work. Not adequate. Not serviceable." Dante closed the last folder. "The best version of this system, built to the standard these people deserve. Not the version that fits a restricted budget." He held Marco's gaze. "The budget is not restricted." He transferred the full project funding that afternoon. He added 15% for contingency. He asked for nothing in return. 6 months later, clean water reached 14,000 people in a hillside community above Santa Teresa. The Reyes Foundation's first public infrastructure project. The gold plaque at the primary distribution node credited Marco Cavalcanti and the community organization. It did not mention Dante's name. He stood at the distribution node on the day the system went live and watched residents fill containers from the clean water tap for the first time. He stood there for a long time without introducing himself to anyone, watching the water move through the system Marco had built to the standard Dante had required. His father had spent 22 years taking from this city. Dante had just given something back. One system. 14,000 people. One correct use of money that had been used incorrectly for 22 years. It was not enough. It was a beginning. Beginnings were the instrument. Fernanda Diaz found the foundation before the foundation found her. She had been managing accounts receivable for his father's primary construction front. 3 years of correct professional work for a company whose revenue she had processed without understanding what it concealed. When the company's principal died on a bridge in Rio, she was left exposed for work she had done in good faith. By any reasonable accounting, she was a victim of the architecture rather than a participant in it. She came to Dante's attention through a contact in Rio's construction sector who described her as the most organized person in a chaotic industry and the most wasted talent I've ever observed. He investigated this independently. Because complimentary descriptions of potential recruits required the most verification, flattery was the easiest thing to manufacture and the hardest thing to see through. The investigation confirmed everything. She had built tracking and reporting structures and spreadsheets more sophisticated than the firm's actual accounting software, compensating independently for a system designed for opacity. Excellent people did this. They improved the tools they were given because inadequate tools offended something foundational in them. He met her in the company's former offices. She had stayed on voluntarily to wind down the receivables because leaving incomplete work was not something she was capable of. And he offered her the truth first, non-negotiable. No one sat at his table without understanding the complete picture of what the table was. He showed her the foundation's structure, the offshore relationships, the complete provenance of the capital. He gave her time. He told her the door was open in both directions. She came back 3 days later with 11 questions. Each one was the question of someone who had read everything carefully and was testing whether the answers matched the documentation. They matched. They were the same information. She sat down. The first crew member from outside Rio came through a contact in the freight industry. He had been in São Paulo for 2 years, working freelance at the level that excellent people worked when nobody had offered them a context worthy of their capability. The parking structure in Barra da Tijuca smelled of hot concrete and overnight exhaust. The atmosphere of urban infrastructure that processed volume all day and retained the evidence of it. Dante arrived early and positioned in the northwest corner. The man arrived earlier. Neither of them mentioned it. They filed it identically as the first confirmation of something that hadn't yet been stated. Dante explained what he was building. Not all of it. The full picture required trust that a first meeting couldn't establish. The principle only. A family, built by choice rather than blood. Built on the technology he had watched operate on a bridge in Rio 18 months ago. My father paid for loyalty, Dante said. I watched it disappear the moment the threat exceeded the payment. I'm building something that stays when the threat is real. Why me? The man said finally. Because you're excellent at what you do, Dante said, and nobody has ever given you a reason to be excellent at it for something worth doing. That's the first honest thing anyone in your world has said to me in 10 years, the man said. I know, Dante said. That's the problem I'm fixing. The man picked up the proposal. He read it once. He looked at Dante. When do we start? He said. Dante picked up his water glass. The water was clean. It had come from infrastructure that worked. We already have, he said. He drove back to Rio that night on the federal highway, the city's lights building on the horizon for the last 40 minutes. The legal pad was on the passenger seat, the technology at the top, 4 names now underneath it. 4 people who had looked at an offer made without leverage, without threat, without the architecture of fear his father had perfected, and said yes. He opened the notebook to the page marked what we're building. He wrote a 5th name. He drove home. He was not studying how to defeat Dom Toretto. He was studying how to become what Dom had built. The Yakuza debt documentation ran to 41 pages and told a story Dante already knew in a different language. He read it across 2 evenings in a São Paulo hotel room on the 41st floor, the climate-controlled stillness of a space designed to feel the same at any hour. The city's vertical sprawl visible in every direction below him, 10 million lives conducting themselves in a geography indifferent to the conversation happening in a room above it. The debt structure was predatory in the way predatory structures were built by people who truly understood their subjects. The interest rate looked reasonable on its face. The compounding interval was monthly rather than annual. The collateral clauses triggered on subjective assessments of performance rather than objective financial metrics, language that gave whoever held the paper the authority to call the collateral at any moment, for any reason dressed in contractual vocabulary. The debt was a leash. It had been sold as a lifeline. Dante set the documentation down. He looked at the city below. He had grown up watching his father build exactly this kind of structure at larger scale. The recognition produced not sympathy, but clarity. He understood the mechanism because the mechanism had been the atmosphere of his childhood, and understanding the mechanism was the first requirement for dismantling it. He picked up his phone and placed the acquisition call through the financial intermediary. The payment cleared on a Thursday. Full face value, 18 months of accrued interest at the contracted rate, and a 15% early settlement premium the original creditor had not asked for. Dante included it because clean transactions paid more than the minimum, and he intended this transaction to be clean in every particular. Total cost, $22.1 million. He did not consider this an expenditure. He considered it an opening position. The envelope arrived at the address listed in the debt documentation 3 days after settlement. Inside, 41 pages stamped settled in red ink across each one. And beneath them, a single card. No letterhead, no contact information, no organizational affiliation. One line in English, "You don't owe me anything. I'd like to talk if you're interested." A phone number below it. He had written the line 9 times before settling on that version. Earlier drafts explained the gesture, contextualized it, offered reassurance. Explanatory openers were the failure mode of people uncertain about what they were offering. The final version said only what was necessary. Either the recipient understood what the minimum meant, or they didn't. And if they didn't, the conversation wasn't going to produce what Dante needed anyway. Takashi called on the 4th day. Not the first. A man who called immediately was a man whose desperation had been waiting by the phone. Not after a week, a man who waited that long was performing indifference, which required the same emotional investment as desperation, and was equally telling. 4 days was the interval of someone who had genuinely sat with the information and decided they wanted to understand more. 4 days was the interval of a man with real options. The call lasted 4 minutes. A location. A time. Neither of them offered anything further. Shibuya at night went past lighting and into climate, every surface carrying a message. The accumulated illumination of 10 million people's commercial activity compressed into a few kilometers of vertical city. The parking structure rose 8 floors above it and held the quiet of spaces positioned just above the noise line, where the city's frequency dropped to something manageable without disappearing entirely. Dante arrived 47 minutes before the agreed time. 6th floor. Northwest corner, sightlines to the ramp from below and the exit to the roof above. Takashi arrived 31 minutes early. He came up in a modified Nissan several categories below what his profile suggested he could acquire. This meant either he had sold everything or he was running deliberately low profile, and the quality of the car's maintenance argued for the second interpretation. Every component that could be maintained was maintained. The car was not wealthy. The car was cared for. Those were different things. He circled the 6th floor once before parking. East wall. When Dante walked across the floor, they both recognized simultaneously that neither had a clear line to the other's blind spot. Neither of them mentioned it. They filed it identically, as the first confirmation of something that hadn't yet been stated. Takashi leaned against the Nissan and looked at Dante with the assessment of a man deciding whether to trust rather than whether to fear. Dante had been reading both looks across enough tables to distinguish them without effort. The trust assessment was the good sign. Fear assessments were the default from people who had been inside his father's world. This man had arrived at something different on his own, without anyone building it for him. "You paid my debt," Takashi said. "Yes, without asking anything first." "Yes, that's not how this works." "I know," Dante said. "I'm changing how this works." He told Takashi what he was building. The architecture, not all of it. The sections relevant to the decision Takashi needed to make. The foundation. The crew as it existed. Incomplete. Early. Built on the principle extracted from the bridge in Rio. The technology. What it meant in operational terms and what it required from the people inside it. Not a function. A standard. "I have access to drivers," Dante said. "What I need is someone who defines the standard. Who builds precision in the people around him by embodying it himself, whose capability raises the ceiling for everyone working alongside him." Takashi looked at the floor for a moment, processing the distinction between being recruited as a function and being recruited as a standard. The kind of distinction that didn't matter to people who had never been treated as anything except a function, and mattered enormously to people who had spent years understanding the difference. "Your father had drivers," Takashi said. "My father had people who drove because they were paid or afraid," Dante said. When the payment stopped and the fear disappeared, they stopped driving. He held Takashi's gaze. "I want people who drive because it's the most complete expression of who they are, and because what they're driving for is worth being complete for." Takashi was quiet. 6 floors below, Shibuya ran its permanent frequency. the compressed air sound of a city at density. 10 million simultaneous lives reaching this height is something almost musical. Dante walked to the northwest corner. The Pagani Huayra was gold with a carbon fiber undertray. His car, the one he drove for his own reasons rather than operational ones. Not a statement of wealth. He had spent enough time around wealth used as statement to find the practice tedious. It was a statement of standard, the best tools available, operated by someone who deserved them. The distinction was not subtle once you understood it. He held out the key. Not a payment, he said. An invitation. Drive it first. Make sure the seat fits before you decide anything. He set the key on the Nissan's hood between them. If it doesn't fit, return it. We part with nothing owed in either direction. The settlement stands regardless. He stepped back, hands in his jacket pockets. Take your time, he said. I'll be here. Takashi took the key. He opened the Pagani and sat in it for 30 seconds before he started it, not learning the controls. He had sat in one briefly at a Monaco event 3 years prior, and that kind of spatial memory didn't require reacquisition. He was sitting in it the way you sat in something before you committed to it, feeling whether the space accepted you, whether the geometry matched how you moved through the world. He started the engine. A Pagani Huayra at ignition is not a performance. It is a 730 horsepower AMG V12 declaring its available capability with the simplicity of something that has nothing to prove. The sound rose through the parking structure's concrete acoustics and returned from the ceiling doubled, a frequency Dante felt in his sternum from 20 meters away. Takashi reversed cleanly, found the ramp angle, was gone. Dante walked to the east wall. He leaned against the concrete and looked at the city through the structure's open face, the Shibuya skyline doing what it did all night. A weather system of accumulated light and commerce, indifferent to a conversation on a parking structure floor that had just determined the shape of something. Neither of them could yet fully see. He waited, not monitoring, not processing the operational items in his working memory. Simply present, the full quality of waiting that did not require anything from the waiting except itself. 45 minutes after the Pagani left the 6th floor, it came back up the ramp. Takashi pulled into the northwest corner. The engine went quiet. He sat for a moment in the silence, the particular stillness after a drive that has taken you somewhere inside yourself. Not the stillness of deciding. The stillness after the decision has been confirmed by the body rather than the mind, and the body is absorbing what the confirmation means. He got out. His face had the quality of someone who had visited a part of themselves they hadn't been to in a long time and found it intact. Not overwhelmed, not performing anything. The composure of a person who has just confirmed something they needed to confirm and is ready to move forward on the basis of that confirmation. He walked to Dante. He held out the key. The seat fits, he said. Dante took the key. He looked at Takashi for a moment, not assessing, not calibrating. Present with the weight of what had just happened, not a recruitment. The beginning of something that recruitment was too small a word for. Welcome, he said. What happened on that 6th floor parking structure in Shibuya was not designed. This was the distinction Dante had been building toward since the legal pad in the Ipanema apartment, since the moment he understood that design could create conditions but could not create outcomes. You could build the right space. You could put the right seat in front of the right person. You could ensure the conditions for the real thing were present. What happened inside the space? The 45 minutes Takashi had spent on Tokyo's midnight streets. The quality of his face when he returned. The way he held out the key with the posture of someone returning something precious rather than something borrowed. That was not Dante's work. That was Takashi's. Dom had built his family over years, through shared crucibles, through the accumulated density of experience that bonded people the way heat bonded metal. Organic, slow, producing the loyalty that came from things that took time to become real. Dante was building faster and more deliberately. The question he could not yet answer, because the answer required time he hadn't spent, was whether what he was building would carry the same weight when the crucible arrived. He didn't know. What he knew was this: Takashi's 45 minutes had not been performed. The quality of his face when he returned was not producible through performance. Some things were too fine for that. The seat fit. That was real. Everything else was architecture. The architecture was his to design. He was getting better at it. The Reyes Foundation's Sao Paulo administrative office opened in the 4th month of operations. Fernanda had selected the building, a 4-floor commercial property in Pineros with unremarkable street presence and the interior architecture of a place built for people who needed to work, rather than people who needed to appear to work. Clean sightlines, acoustic separation between floors, a 3rd floor that could be configured for sensitive operational functions without the configuration being visible from outside. She had presented 3 options ranked by suitability. He chose her first choice without reading the reasoning. By month 4, he had learned that Fernanda's first choice was always correct, and reading the reasoning was confirmation of what he already knew rather than a path to a better decision. She had noted this. She filed it the way she filed things that were information about the person she worked with rather than about the task. She was building a model of how Dante operated, the same way he was building models of everyone around him. Both of them understood this. Neither found it threatening. It was the atmosphere of the table he was trying to build. On the day the office opened, 5 people gathered on the 3rd floor for the first time, arrived through different routes, called by different versions of the same offer, held by the same principal. Fernanda had set out coffee and something from a bakery 2 blocks east. The room smelled of fresh pastry and floor wax, and the newness of a space that had not yet developed a character of its own. It was going to develop one. Dante could feel the shape of it beginning. He looked at the 5 people at the table. He looked at the notebook, the page marked "What We're Building," 5 names arranged with the precision of someone mapping a structure rather than listing people. The crew was not yet complete. But it was real. He had found that out in a parking structure in Shibuya. Now the finding had a room to be real in, and rooms gave things the permanence that parking structures could only suggest. He opened the notebook to the next blank page. He began writing names. Somewhere in those 5 people and those pages and this room that smelled of coffee and fresh bread and possibility, the dynasty was becoming itself. He could feel it. He went back to work. The Foundation's 3rd floor office at 2 a.m. smelled differently than it did during working hours. Coffee gone, street noise reduced to the low frequency of a city's overnight register, the overhead lights replaced by the blue-white glow of monitors that had been running since before. Midnight. Yara Jemba worked in this atmosphere by preference. She had designed her own schedule, 6 hours of sleep on a rotating cycle, the pre-dawn hours reserved for the kind of work that required ambient noise to fall below a threshold before the signal became visible. Dante had not specified this schedule. She had arrived at it independently, the same way she arrived at most things, by understanding what the work required and then building her life around that requirement rather than the other way around. She had spent 12 years at a NATO contractor building the communications infrastructure that the Alliance's intelligence apparatus used for field operations across 3 continents. She had been excellent at the work. She had also, in her 9th year, understood something that took 9 years to fully articulate. The infrastructure she was building was not neutral. The capability she developed did not sit still. It went somewhere, in the hands of institutions she had not chosen and could not control. And where it went was not always where the mission statements said it would go. She left in the 12th year. Quietly, no public statement, no burned bridges, because people who left loudly had a harder time building something new in the silence. A contact in São Paulo's cybersecurity community had described her to Dante as the most technically dangerous person I've ever worked with, who has somehow never done anything technically dangerous with it. He had investigated this independently, as he investigated all characterizations. It held. He had offered her the truth first, the Foundation's complete structure, the offshore relationships, the full provenance of the capital. She listened without expression. Then she asked 12 questions in sequence, each one aimed at a different potential weakness in the structure he had described. Each one surgical. He answered all 12. The answers matched the documentation. She took 2 days. She came back with a proposal for the Family Eyes architecture, a monitoring system she had designed herself, on her own time, as a proof of concept for what the dynasty needed and didn't yet have. She had built it before he asked for it, because she had understood what was needed before he finished explaining it. He looked at the architecture for a long time. "When can you start?" he said. "I already have," she said. The bank file landed on Dante's workstation on a Tuesday evening. 91 pages delivered with the economy of a woman who understood that thorough documentation and efficient presentation were not in conflict. The core finding occupied 2 paragraphs on page 14. The bank was systematically defrauding its small business borrowers through an undisclosed fee structure embedded in loan amendment documentation. Not the original loan agreements. Those were clean, filed correctly, consistent with regulatory standards. The fraud lived in the amendment layer, a secondary process triggered at the 12-month mark of each loan, dressed in the language of routine annual review that introduced compounding fees borrowers had not agreed to in their original terms. The amendment documents were signed. Borrowers had signed them because branch managers described them as administrative formalities. The branch managers had been trained to describe them this way. The training was documented in an internal archive that the compliance department maintained, and the legal team ensured never appeared in external audit. Compliance knew. Legal knew. Senior shareholders knew. 3 senior shareholders held federal ministerial appointments. 11 years. Aggregate extraction, approximately $340 million. From people who ran food stalls and repair shops, and small markets in communities where $340 million was not an abstraction. It was generations of accumulated effort, extracted through documentation engineered to be invisible until it was too late to reverse. Dante read the file twice. He placed it on the workstation. He looked at it for 90 seconds, his standard interval. The pause that separated the emotional response from the operational one. Then he called the crew. Gabriel Mota sat at the back of the operations room during Yara's briefing, with the stillness of someone running parallel calculations. Not disengaged. The opposite. He processed information best when given room to develop, rather than being responded to immediately. Everyone who had worked with him for more than 2 weeks had learned to read his silences as the most active thing he did. He had been running social intelligence operations for 3 separate legitimate security firms simultaneously, freelance, earning enough to be comfortable and not enough to be satisfied. Excellent people found themselves in this situation when the market could identify their capability but not fully compensate it. He was the finest social engineer Dante had encountered outside classified operations. His methodology was not manipulation, it was precision reading. He understood how people organized their decision-making, where the load-bearing assumptions were, and how to position himself within those assumptions so naturally that the positioning never felt imposed. He did not deceive. He found the version of a conversation that allowed both parties to arrive at the truth by different routes. Dante had watched him operate twice before making the offer. Both times he observed a man who left every interaction cleaner than he found it. This was not common. Yara covered the fraud architecture in 8 minutes, the technical access points in 4, the vulnerability in the bank's server infrastructure in 2. The vulnerability, the bank's compliance documentation, the records that should not exist, was maintained on a secondary server installed during a 2018 upgrade. The contractor had flagged a security gap in the legacy integration protocol. The bank's IT management had deprioritized remediation. The gap had been sitting open for 3 years. Physical backup, Gabriel said from the back of the room. There's always a physical backup for documentation they need to keep off the primary audit trail. They won't trust digital only for something this significant. Yara looked at him. Branch level, North Zone. Server room access through the administrative office. The branch manager has a discretionary access credential for after-hours entry. Current cycle renews Friday. Thursday night, Gabriel said. I'll need 40 minutes. You'll have 32, Yara said. The security rotation gives 35 minutes. I'm not building 3 minutes of margin into a social engineering operation in a bank. Gabriel considered this for exactly as long as it required. Then I'll need 29. The North Zone branch at 1923 held the end-of-day atmosphere of a building that had processed its official volume and was settling into the administrative remainder. The cleaning crew not yet arrived. The last counter staff logging off. The overhead lighting at half its daytime level. The particular quiet of commercial infrastructure between its public and private phases. Gabriel walked in carrying a tablet, wearing a suit calibrated to the midpoint between compliance consultant and regional oversight, not expensive enough to be memorable. Not inexpensive enough to undermine the credential. He spoke the register of Portuguese that administrative bank staff used with people slightly more senior than themselves. Dante had defined the objective 30 minutes of access to the administrative office and the server room beyond, and had left the path entirely to Gabriel. This was the principle he held for all his crew. Define the destination, never the route. The route was the person's capability expressing itself. Controlling the route suppressed the capability. Gabriel's approach took 11 minutes to establish and 19 minutes to execute. The confirmation came through the operations channel in Fernanda's steady voice. Secondary server accessed. Extraction running. 14 minutes. 260 files. The complete internal compliance archive. 3 years of documentation. The branch manager fraud scripts. The shareholder communications confirming knowledge and approval at the senior level. Yara packaged the extraction within 40 seconds of receipt. The package went to a São Paulo legal firm with a documented anti-corruption practice and 2 active federal prosecutor relationships. An anonymous transmittal letter specifying the evidentiary provenance chain and flagging the 3 ministerial shareholders by name and position. The package arrived at the federal prosecutor's office at 2247. Dante received confirmation at 0112. He was in the Pinheiros screening room when the crew returned. Not the operations room, in the room where he did the thinking that the operations room's activity precluded. The vault footage ran on the primary screen, sound off, the bridge sequence moving in the particular silence that made images more visible rather than less. He had been watching Dom at the apex of the swing. Not the physics, not the calculation. Just the face. What it meant to be exactly where you had always been trying to be. The crew arrived over 40 minutes. DK first, then Valentina, then Yara. Fernanda had been in the operations room throughout and was already building the operational log. Gabriel came last. He had changed his jacket. He sat across from Dante and looked at the screen for a moment, Dom at the apex, the full weight of everything Dante had been studying for 2 years visible in a single frozen frame. Then he looked at Dante with the expression of a man turning over something he needed to say. "I've worked for a lot of people," Gabriel said. "Some paid well, most paid reasonably. All of them took something from every operation." He looked at the workstation, the footage, the notebooks on the shelf. "We took nothing tonight. Every cent of that fraud goes back to the people it came from." "Yes," Dante said. "I've never worked for someone who made sure they got nothing from it." The observation carried the weight of genuine accounting, a man measuring the distance between his experience and the current moment and finding the distance significant. "I got something," Dante said. Gabriel looked at him. "I found out we work." The room held this with the quality of a statement that was accurate and complete and required nothing added to it. DK appeared in the doorway. He looked at the crew in the screening room. He looked at the vault footage on the screen. He looked at Dante. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The federal investigation opened 10 days later. The bank's predatory loan structures were frozen within the week. Restitution proceedings for the affected borrowers commenced in the 3rd week, a process that would ultimately return approximately $280 million to the communities from which it had been extracted over 11 years. None of the coverage mentioned the Reyes Foundation. The anonymous transmittal letter had been specific about provenance without being specific about origin. In the North Zone community where the largest concentration of affected borrowers lived, the name circulating through the small markets and repair shops and food stalls was not Reyes. It was simply someone helped. The someone had not asked for credit. In the Pinheiros screening room at 4 a.m, the notebook marked what we're building had 14 names, arranged with the precision of someone mapping a structure rather than listing people. The connections drawn in pencil so they could be redrawn as the structure revealed its own shape. The crew was not yet complete, but it worked. Dante had found that out on a Thursday night in a North Zone bank, with 5 people who had arrived at this room through different routes and had operated, without instruction, as a single system. His father had built on fear, which was the lightest material available, weightless until the moment you needed it to hold something, at which point it held nothing at all. The foundation was built on something else. Something that got heavier the more it was tested. He understood now what Dom had understood for 20 years. The weight was the point. The weight was what you wanted. The weight was what everything else was built from. He reached to the shelf. He took down the second notebook, the one he had not yet opened. He set it on the workstation. He opened it to the first page. He wrote at the top, in the precise hand he used when the information mattered, "What we're building." He uncapped the pen. He began to write names. The screening room on the 3rd floor of the Pinheiros building smelled of the work that had been done inside it, the particular combination of coffee and warm electronics and paper that accumulated in rooms where someone had been thinking hard for a long time. Dante had built it himself across 4 days in the first month after Rio. Equipment sourced through 3 separate vendors in a sequence that meant no single vendor understood the complete configuration. 2 screens. A workstation with processing capacity for multi-feed synchronization. 3 notebooks on the shelf beside the door. 1 filled, 2 waiting. The primary feed contained every available visual record of the Fast 5 vault operation. 43 distinct camera sources, cross-referenced and time-synchronized into a composite record that no single agency or media organization possessed in full. He had assembled it across 6 months through legitimate public records requests, 3 media organization archives, and the back-channel access to municipal surveillance infrastructure that his father's legacy relationships still provided, even dissolved. His father had used those relationships to suppress inconvenient footage. Dante used them to find it. He watched the vault operation the way a coach watched game film, in sections, annotated, with the pause and examine discipline of someone who understood that the value of recorded footage was not in the watching, but in the stopping. Every significant moment warranted a stop. Every stop warranted a notation. The notations went into Notebook 1, which by the 4th month contained 214 entries in the precise hand he used when the information mattered. The first entry, dated the 2nd day of study, Vince drives the bus knowing he might not come back. He does it because Dom asks. No hesitation interval, less than 2 seconds between the ask and the action. He timed the hesitation interval precisely. He cross-referenced it against the physiological literature on decision-making under duress, which showed that genuine commitment decisions made under acute stress were processed faster than calculated ones. A man who had to think about whether to risk his life for someone was experiencing conflict. A man who didn't have to think was experiencing certainty. Vince's certainty had a quality Dante watched 11 times before he felt he understood it. Not the certainty of someone following orders, the certainty of someone who had already decided, at some earlier, quieter moment, what they would do when the moment came. Dom had built the conditions for that prior decision. Whatever had accumulated between Dom and Vince across years before this bridge had produced a man who could access certainty at 2 seconds' notice when someone he loved was in danger. He wrote, "The decision was made before the crisis. Dom's work is done in the quiet moments. The crisis is just the verification." The entry on Roman ran to 3 pages. He was, on first viewing, the most counterintuitive element of Dom's operational structure. His function appeared contradictory. Apparent comic relief delivered simultaneously with genuine capability, a combination most operational contexts treated as mutually exclusive. The standard model held that the person who talked was not the person who delivered. Roman violated this consistently. Dante spent 2 weeks trying to understand Roman before he found the correct frame. Roman was not the person who talked despite his capability. He talked because he was capable, the freedom of speech that came from being secure enough in your function that performance anxiety had no purchase on you. He processed stress through humor because the humor was real. He genuinely found the situation funny, and finding it funny required a distance from fear that most people in equivalent positions could not access. Dom had built that distance. Through some combination of inclusion and consistent challenge and the message, delivered across years, that Roman's presence at the table was not contingent on silence or seriousness. Roman's presence was wanted, not tolerated. Wanted. A man whose presence was genuinely wanted stopped managing his volume. Entry, page 47, Roman's loudness is evidence of trust. A man who doesn't trust the room controls his volume. Dom built a room where Roman didn't have to control anything. The loudness is data about the room, not about Roman. The entry on Mia was the shortest. It required the most revisions. She was in the support vehicle during the vault sequence, the least visibly demanding position, a driver waiting at a rally point while the primary action happened elsewhere. Dante almost skipped the deep analysis. He had learned through the first 2 months of study that the elements he was most tempted to skip were frequently the most instructive. He did not skip her. What he found, Mia was not in the support vehicle because she was the least capable. She was there because Dom had placed his most valuable operational element in the most strategically critical position, which was not the vault sequence, but the exit. The vault could go wrong in recoverable ways. A vault on cables over a river could be revised mid-execution if the initial calculation was wrong. The exit could not go wrong at all. One failure at the exit, and nothing else mattered. Dom trusted Mia with the thing that had no margin. Not the second best option. The first. He wrote, "True trust is assignment to the critical path. Everything else is management." He sat with this for a long time. He thought about Fernanda, where he had placed her in the dynasty's architecture, what functions he had given her and what he had not. He reviewed his own decisions against this principle. He found 2 places where he had managed rather than trusted. He corrected them the next morning. He told Fernanda directly, "The only kind of correction that meant anything, I've been managing you in 2 areas where I should have been trusting you. Here are the areas. The decisions are yours." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded and went back to work. The correction cost him nothing and gained him everything. That was the arithmetic of the trust decision. Every time. The bridge drift sequence he watched 57 times. The physics first, cable angles, speed calculations, approach geometry. He built a physical model on the screening room's second table, cable lengths mapped to actual documentation. Vault mass distributed across a weighted frame built from engineering specifications obtained through his father's municipal infrastructure access. He confirmed the physics on the 14th viewing and set the confirmation aside. The remaining 43 viewings were about something else. He was trying to understand the moment Dom chose the swing point. Not what he chose. The physics told him that. The quality of the choosing. The cognitive state of a man making a calculation that had to be correct on the first attempt, in a moving vehicle, under conditions that precluded error, for people whose survival depended on precision rather than approximation. He watched Dom's head movements on the closest camera angle, the way his eyes tracked the bridge geometry, the interval between acquisition of the approach angle and the steering input that committed to it. The interval was 1.3 seconds. At his workstation, using the physical model, with full information and no operational pressure, Dante ran the same calculation. It took him 4 minutes and 12 seconds to arrive at the same answer. Dom had done it in 1.3 seconds from inside a moving vehicle while managing a vault on 2 cables. He wrote, "This is 20 years of preparing for one moment." The calculation was instant because it had been run 10,000 times in less demanding contexts. The bridge was not where Dom developed his capability. The bridge was where he spent it. Then, below that, underlined, build the 10,000. The bridge will come when it comes. The revelation arrived on the 44th viewing and he had not anticipated it. He had been watching the post-sequence footage, Dom and Brian in the water, the crew arriving at the riverbank, people moving toward each other without instruction. Standard analytical frame. He stopped the footage. He sat back. The image was frozen, Dom at the riverbank, water heavy, physically depleted, surrounded by the people who had chosen to be there. Not triumphant. Not relieved in the ordinary sense. Something more particular. The face of a man who was exactly where he had always been trying to be. Standing in proof of something. Dante sat with the image for a long time. He understood, in that sitting, something that had been assembling itself across 6 months of study and had now completed its assembly. He had never wanted to defeat Dom. That had never been the objective, even in the months of acute grief when he might have framed it that way if asked. He had wanted to understand what Dom had built. He had wanted to know whether the understanding could become a blueprint. He had wanted to know whether a man who started from a different position, more resources, different history, a name that currently meant threat rather than family, could arrive at the same destination by a different route. He was beginning to believe the answer was yes. Not because the study had told him what to do. Because the study had given him the name for where he was going. He had been moving toward it for 2 years without fully naming it, and the frozen frame had given him the name. He wanted the face. Not the money. Not the capability. Not the infrastructure. The face Dom was making in the water in Rio. The face of a man who had built something worth building and was standing in the proof of it. That was the destination. He rewound the footage. He found the frame he had returned to most consistently. Dom at the apex of the swing. Vault at full extension. The entire architecture performing at the limit of what it could do, because every person in it was performing at the limit of what they could do. He looked at it for a long time. Then he reached to the shelf. He took down the second notebook, the one he had not yet opened. He set it on the workstation. He opened it to the first page. He wrote at the top, in the hand he used when the information mattered, what we're building. He uncapped the pen. He began to write names. Owen Shaw's operational dissolution had a timeline and Yara had been tracking it for 6 weeks. Shaw's core crew had been identified by DSS. His financial infrastructure was under multi-jurisdictional review. The center was collapsing with the controlled velocity of something built well and failing well, not chaotically, but in sequence. The outer layers releasing assets first while the inner layers held as long as holding was viable. The outer layers were where Yara had been watching. She found the communications encryption package through a signals intelligence flag, an encrypted transmission architecture in Shaw's network with a technical fingerprint that suggested a different builder at a higher level of sophistication than Shaw's in-house capability, not his design, something he had acquired. She spent 4 days tracing its provenance. A relay network design, she said. 12 nodes across 3 continents. Whoever built this was working at state-sponsored infrastructure level. She brought up the provenance chain. The final intermediary is in London. He's been liquidating Shaw's peripheral assets for 11 days. Who else knows about it? Dante said. Yara paused with the precision of someone who had the answer and was deciding how to frame it. Dom Toretto's technical operator, she said. Tej Parker. They've been running the same provenance trace. A pause. They're approximately 48 hours behind us. Dante looked at the architecture diagram for a long time. London, he said. A commercial warehouse in Bermondsey. Window is approximately 72 hours before the DSS closes his access to Shaw's peripheral network. Dante stood. He looked at the diagram one final time. Get the crew ready, he said. We're going to London. The warehouse was in a district of Bermondsey, converting itself from one thing into another without having decided what the other thing was. Loading docks with gallery lighting in the windows above them. Freight containers repurposed as studio space. The persistent smell of the Thames at low tide, carrying the patience of a river that had been absorbing the city's output for 2,000 years. Dante entered through the southern access at 2151. He crossed to a position with sightlines to all 4 interior access points and had been there for 40 seconds when the eastern loading dock opened. Dom Toretto walked in. Dom Toretto walked into the Bermondsey warehouse and stopped when he saw Dante, not surprised. Updating, running the same assessment Dante was running. Who is this? What do they want? What does their presence change about the objective? Both of them arrived at their assessments in approximately the same time. Neither spoke immediately. The warehouse held the acoustic signature of a large empty space with a recent purpose still echoing in it, the ghost rectangles of removed equipment on the concrete floor, the hum of a temporary power run, the intermediaries working setup at the building's center. Dante spoke first. He had more to explain. Dom Toretto, he said. I've been studying your work for 3 years. Dom looked at him with the full attention Dante had watched documented in the vault footage. Complete, present, running multiple assessments simultaneously, without any of them showing on the surface. Reyes, he said. Dante, I know who you are. Not hostile. Not cautious in the defensive sense. Simply accurate. Dom was a man who addressed things as they were. Dante had spent 3 years studying this quality and was still not entirely prepared for it in person. Then you know I'm not here for revenge, Dante said. Both hands open, away from his body, not performing unarmed, making his position visible. We want the same thing. We're better taking it together. The deciding happened at a depth that didn't require surface movement. What do you get from it? Dom said. The network documentation in Shaw's financial architecture. It intersects with infrastructure I'm in the process of legitimizing. Dante kept his voice at the level of 2 people who didn't need theater. You take the encryption package. I want the documentation on his European financial connections. Why legitimate? Because the infrastructure is real. The people depending on it are real. The legitimization is the correct use of what my father built and didn't finish correctly. He held Dom's gaze. I've been working on the correct version for 3 years. Dom looked at him for a long time. Behind him, his 2 crew members hadn't moved. Behind Dante, the dynasty was positioned outside. Yara monitoring, DK ready, Fernanda on the timeline. Both operations existing simultaneously in the space, neither visible. Dom made his decision the way he made all his decisions, without announcing the process. One job, he said. We see how it goes. The operation took 27 minutes. Both crews working the same space produced the efficiency of 2 systems built to compatible specifications. Not identical, but compatible, which was the operationally relevant category. Dom's crew covered the northern section. Dante's covered the southern. Yara and Tej Parker ran a parallel technical extraction that Gabriel later described as watching two people finish each other's sentences in a language neither of them knew the other spoke. The encryption package went into Dom's custody. The financial documentation went into Dante's. The intermediary, finding himself in a warehouse that had filled with two professional operations running in seamless coordination, made a sensible decision and cooperated completely. The operation ran clean. No deviation. No improvisation required. Afterward, in the loading dock with both crews present, Gabriel produced a piece of chalk. He had apparently been carrying it for exactly this contingency, which was so specifically Gabriel that nobody who knew him questioned the preparation. He drew the start line on the loading dock's exterior asphalt with the deliberate precision of a man performing a ceremony. "Quarter mile," he said. "Let's settle it." Roman, from Dom's side of the dock, said, "Finally someone speaking sense." The Bermondsey Street ran straight for just over a quarter mile before the first intersection, sufficient, at the speeds both vehicles were capable of, to produce a definitive result. Both crews arranged themselves along both sides. Yara had a timing system running. Tay Parker also had a timing system running. Neither of them had discussed this. Both had simply done it. Dante in the Pagani, Dom in the Charger. The count ran. They drove. What happened in the next 11 seconds was not a performance. Both drivers ran at full capability, not managed effort. Not positioned racing, but the complete expression of everything each had built their driving toward across the length of their operational lives. The Pagani's AMG V12 and the Charger's supercharged V8 were different philosophies of power producing different acoustic signatures. The combination of those sounds running down the Bermondsey Street simultaneously was the kind of thing the people watching would carry in their memory at the frequency of things that couldn't be planned. The timing systems agreed to 1,000th of a second. Both crews looked at the numbers simultaneously. The silence that followed had the texture of a result that answered a question and opened a larger one. Dom got out of the Charger. Dante got out of the Pagani. They stood at the chalk line with the distance of the race behind them. "You're good," Dom said. "You built the standard," Dante said. "I was always going to find you." He looked at Dom directly. The crew was present on both sides, but the conversation had the quality of a private exchange conducted in a public space, both men aware of the audience, both addressing each other past it. "I want you to know something," Dante said. "My father's choices cost your family pain I can't quantify and can't undo. I'm not asking you to set that aside. I'm not offering an exchange for it." He held Dom's gaze with the steadiness of someone who had been preparing this not as a performance, but as an accounting he owed. "I watched you on that bridge in Rio. While my father was sinking, I watched what you'd built hold together around you." Dom said nothing. He was listening, the full quality of it, the kind that didn't require management. "I understood something for the first time," Dante said. "That family is everything. Not the money, not the infrastructure, the people who choose to hold." He looked at the chalk line between them. "I wanted you to know I learned from the right source." Dom looked at him for a long moment. The complete assessment, running at a depth that didn't show. "What you're building," Dom said. "Is it holding?" Dante thought about the crew along the Bermondsey loading dock. DK running a vehicle check with the attention of someone for whom a vehicle's condition was a direct reflection of the respect owed to the people who drove it. Fernanda compiling the operational log, precise and unhurried. Gabriel still holding the chalk, turning it between his fingers with the patience of a man who had produced the evening's defining moment and was quietly satisfied with the result. Yara and Tay Parker packing equipment side by side in what appeared to be an entirely self-organized collaboration. Two technical operators from different families, running the same methodology, recognizing each other on sight. "Yes," Dante said, "it's holding." Dom looked at the chalk line, then at both cars at the finish, then at the empty street beyond them. He said nothing further. He walked back to the Charger. Dante watched the crew fall in around him with the organic reorganization of people who moved together without instruction. The taillights cleared the end of the street and turned north. Gabriel appeared at Dante's shoulder. "Dead heat," he said, still holding the chalk. "I've never seen that before." "Neither have I," Dante said. He looked at the empty street, the chalk line and the finish marks and the space where two cars had arrived at the same place at the same moment, not because the race had been managed to that outcome, but because it was the true result. Same destination, different routes. He had always believed this was possible. Now he had data. Nobody's memo on Dante Reyes ran to 4 pages and arrived at its conclusion in the final paragraph. Either the most sophisticated criminal legitimization operation we have encountered in this hemisphere, or a genuine reformation. Either way, we cannot touch him. Monitor and maintain. The aircraft cabin at 38,000 feet held the pressurized stillness of high-altitude flight at night, the darkness outside the window absolute in a way that ground-level dark never was. Luke Hobbs read the memo twice and arrived at the same result both times. He folded the pages. He looked at the darkness. Nobody's memos resolved. That was their defining characteristic. The product of an analytical methodology that had spent 11 years producing conclusions from material that other agencies couldn't organize into anything except uncertainty. When nobody produced 4 pages that didn't resolve. The 4 pages were the information. Dante Reyes was a man that nobody's organization could not categorize. Hobbs had decided to go and see for himself. The Foundation's Sao Paulo headquarters occupied 4 floors of a building in Itaim Bibi, designed with the quiet confidence of a place that had nothing to perform. Not the aggressive transparency of an organization performing legitimacy, glass walls and open plans, and the architecture of people who wanted to be seen being transparent. This building looked like exactly what it said it was. Rarer than it should have been. Immediately legible to someone who had spent 20 years distinguishing between the two. The lobby escort spoke 4 languages with the ease of someone for whom multilingualism was ambient rather than acquired. She answered Hobbs's questions with the institutional pride of someone who believed in the place she worked. You could not manufacture that in employees who were performing it. Dante was standing at the 4th floor window when Hobbs entered, looking at the city with genuine interest, not staged, not rehearsed. Simply interrupted in an activity he had actually been engaged in, younger than the file suggested. Not in years, in the way his age expressed itself, the configuration of someone whose formation had been unusual enough to produce a different result than the standard. The coffee was excellent, not prepared for the visit, the same quality as everything else in the building. The product of a consistent standard rather than preparation for an audience. "I've seen your file," Hobbs said. "Both of them?" Dante said. "Both, then you understand why they read like documents about 2 different people. I'm here to understand which person I'm talking to." "The current one," Dante said. "The old file describes a man who hadn't made a decision yet. I've made the decision. The Foundation's work is the decision in operational form. The documentation appeared without being requested. 14 years of tax filings across 12 jurisdictions. Foundation financial trail from initial capitalization through current operational budget. Impact reports. Letters of commendation from the UNCR's regional director, the Brazilian federal government's Office of Social Development, 3 independent humanitarian organizations whose credibility Hobbs knew personally from field operations. Infrastructure documentation, water systems, schools, medical clinics, community oversight structures. All of it real. The accounting firm's reputation was real. The water system above Santa Teresa was real. He had checked before the flight. Operational, serving 23,000 people, technically excellent. "Your father controlled this city through fear," Hobbs said. "Yes, you're controlling it through something else." "I'm not controlling it," Dante said. "I'm investing in it. Control extracts. Investment compounds. My father's infrastructure required continuous maintenance because nothing inside it wanted to stay. What I'm building wants to stay because it works for the people inside it." He set down his coffee. "You can't arrest a man for building schools." "No," Hobbs said. "I can't. And you can't arrest a man for converting his father's infrastructure into something functional." Dante held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to read what's in front of you and arrive at the conclusion the evidence supports." The question sat in the room with the weight of a question whose answer both parties already knew. "Have I done anything illegal?" Dante said. "Not yet," Hobbs said. "Then we don't have a legal conversation to have today." On the expressway back toward Guarulhos, Hobbs called nobody. "He's clean," he said. "Not performance clean, actually clean. Every element holds. That doesn't make him safe," nobody said. "No, it makes him untouchable. And effective. The infrastructure he's building in the favela corridor, water, schools, medical access, the state has been failing to deliver this for 30 years. He's delivering it. with genuine community oversight and technical standards that exceed the state's own specifications. Nobody's silence had the quality of a man updating a document. Both, nobody said finally. Both what? You're asking whether he's a problem or a solution. A pause. He's both. That's the most dangerous category. Hobbs drove another mile before he said the thing he'd been holding since the fourth floor. He said it to the windshield, to the city outside, to the Sao Paulo expressway that didn't need to hear it. He's going to come back for help, he said. Not because I give him anything. Because whatever he's building will eventually need institutional cover, and he's already calculated that I'm the right person to provide it. He had seen this in the meeting, not in anything Dante had said, but in what he hadn't said. The absence of a request from a man who clearly understood the value of institutional relationships was not the absence of intent. It was timing. Behind him in Itaim Bibi, on the fourth floor, Fernanda appeared at Dante's shoulder as the rental car cleared the building's sightline. He'll be back, she said. Yes, Dante said. He was still looking at the city. But next time he'll want to ask for help. The Family Eye had been operational for 14 months before it produced something Dante did not know how to file. Yara had built it across the dynasty's second year the way she built all her systems. Distributed, redundant, designed on the assumption that any single node could be compromised without compromising the whole. The architecture drew on the most durable principles from her NATO contractor period, stripped of the institutional vulnerabilities that centralized systems carried. No central node meant no single point of failure. It also meant no single point of access for someone coming in from outside. The system ran passive monitoring across 47 threat vectors and 17 persons of interest. Dante had added a third category during the design phase, over Yara's initial silence. The third category was the Toretto family's extended network. He explained without being asked, because Yara operated better with complete information than with partial information filtered through assumptions. He was not monitoring Dom's family the way an adversary monitored a target. He was monitoring them the way you monitored something you were responsible for protecting. Because the dynasty occupied the same operational space as Dom's crew in an increasing number of theaters, and threats to Dom's network frequently traveled the same corridor as threats to Dante's. Early detection on Dom's side produced preparation time. The alternative did not. Yara listened. Then she said, I'll build a separate protocol, passive only. No active queries, no penetration of their communications infrastructure. Ambient biometric and signals monitoring in theaters where our networks overlap. That's what I was going to specify, Dante said. I know, she said. I wanted you to hear me say it so you knew I understood the boundary. He noted this. He filed it in the column he maintained for moments that confirmed someone was exactly the right person for what they were doing, the architecture revealing itself through a small exchange, showing it was capable of holding what he was going to put in it. The flag arrived at 0623 on a Tuesday morning. Dante was running the Foundation's quarterly infrastructure review, clean water systems serving 47,000 people across 6 communities, 3 school construction projects at various stages of completion, a medical clinic network that had processed 12,000 patient visits in its first operational year. The flag arrived as a notification in the Family Eye's monitoring interface, a biometric match, confidence level 94.3%, flagged against a name in the third category watch list. The name was Gisele Yashar. He looked at the notification for a moment. The infrastructure review remained open beside it. The routine work of building something and the unexpected arrival of something that had no category waiting for it. He opened the full flag report. The biometric match had been triggered by a facial recognition hit from a Port Authority camera in a Moroccan coastal city. The match was to a French passport holder named Isabelle Caron, employed as a marine biologist at a research facility on the coast. He pulled Gisele Yashar's file from the third category archive. Mossad trained, deep cover operative, embedded with Dom's crew from the Fast 4 timeline onward. Documented death during the Shaw runway operation, a sacrifice recorded on multiple camera angles, witnessed by multiple crew members. Consistent with a fall from a moving vehicle at speed at a military airfield in Spain. He read the documentation twice, then a third time with the attention he gave to documentation produced under circumstances where the full picture was not yet visible. The fall had not been filmed to its conclusion. The camera angles covered the moment of release. None of them covered the landing. He sat with this for 90 seconds. Then he ran the option tree completely, all options, including the ones he found distasteful. Because an option tree that excluded distasteful options was not an option tree but a preference list, and preference lists made poor operational instruments. Option 1. Do nothing. The match was filed, noted, operationally irrelevant. Option 2. Make contact. Offer resources, shelter, institutional cover. Mossad trained. 3 years inside Dom's crew, the recruitment case wrote itself. Option 3. Use the information as leverage. Dom's crew carried the loss of Gisele with the weight that losses carried in a family built on genuine connection. A file proving her survival, offered in exchange for operational cooperation or institutional access, was a negotiating instrument of genuine value. He eliminated option 3 in the time it took him to complete the sentence in his own mind. He was not his father. He sat with option 1 and option 2 for a long time. Then he booked a flight to Morocco. The research facility sat on a stretch of cliff above the Atlantic south of the city, low white buildings arranged around a central courtyard with the functionality of a place built for people who needed to work rather than perform working. Salt air reached the car park before the buildings came into view. The smell of it was clean in the way that things were clean, when they had been cleaned by something much larger than themselves for a very long time. He walked into the facility's main entrance and gave his name as Dante Reyes. He asked for Isabel Karen by that name, not by Gisele Yashar, not by both names paired, but only by the name she had chosen. The register communicated, "I know who you actually are, and I am not going to demonstrate that knowledge in a lobby." He was shown to a laboratory facing the water. The Atlantic through the laboratory window held the flat, honest light of a northern coast in winter, the kind of light that showed things as they were rather than as they might prefer to be seen. It fell across the workstation and the tidal monitoring equipment and the careful organization of a workspace belonging to someone who had made peace with their surroundings. Gisele was at the workstation with her back to the door. She turned when he entered. In the space between hearing the door and completing the turn, her body ran the full professional assessment, threat level, exit options, the controlled recalibration of someone whose formation had included years of managing exactly this category of surprise. The assessment took less than 2 seconds and produced a stillness that was not fear, but readiness. She looked at him. "I'm not here to compromise you," Dante said, before she could run the scenario tree to its first defensive branch. "I found you by accident. My surveillance network flagged your biometrics through a municipal camera feed." He held her gaze. "I've already deleted the flag. You're not in my system." She measured this against everything she knew. His name, his father's name, the bridge in Rio. Whatever Dom's crew had built into its institutional memory across the years since the vault. "What do you want?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I came to tell you that someone misses you." He let this sit. Not for effect, because it was the complete thing he had come to say. Adding to it would have been diminishment. "I thought you should know that," he said, "before I leave." He left. The return flight to Sao Paulo took 9 hours. He spent 3 of them on the Foundation's quarterly review, which he completed and filed before the halfway point. He spent the remaining 4 looking at the Atlantic below the aircraft, running the accounting on the decision he had made, checking it from multiple angles. He arrived at the same answer each time. Option 3 had been available. Leverage of genuine value. A direct approach with resources and shelter had genuine recruitment value. Her skill set was precise, and the dynasty had gaps she would close directly. He had chosen neither, because neither was the right use of what he had found. Gisele had built something in Morocco. The quality of it was visible in the facility's courtyard, in the tidal monitoring array, in the genuine work on her screen and the organized peace of her workspace. She had chosen quiet after years of operating at maximum intensity. The choosing was legible in every corner of the space she occupied, the deliberate, unhurried choosing of someone who had made peace with a decision and was living fully inside it. Walking into that laboratory to disrupt a choice she had made would have been his father's action. His father had disrupted choices people made about their own lives as a routine mechanism of control, because a person who had not chosen their situation was a person who could be managed. Dante was not building a dynasty through disruption. He was building it through invitation. The difference between those two things was the difference between what his father had built and what he was building, and the difference needed to be absolute, not approximate, because approximate differences became indistinguishable under pressure. He looked at the Atlantic below and understood something clearly that he had understood intellectually for 3 years. but was understanding in his body for the first time. The technology only worked if you actually believed it. Not performed it. Believed it. He had left Morocco without asking for anything. The commitment was real. He landed in São Paulo. He spent 4 hours building a folder. Gisele's complete survival documentation, location, current identity, proof of life. A provenance chain authenticating every element. He organized it with the same precision he brought to the Foundation's infrastructure documentation, because the precision was the respect, and the respect was owed regardless of whether the folder was ever opened. He put the folder in the Pinheiros building's secure archive. He labeled it with a name, not Gisele's name, Hanlu's name. He did not tell anyone it existed. Fernanda found him in the screening room that evening. The vault footage was running on the primary screen, Dom at the table in the favela safe house, managing the specific personalities around him with the attention of someone who had built those personalities over years and understood each of them at depth. She sat in the second chair. "You went to Morocco alone," she said. "Yes, Gisele Yashar. Not a question. You didn't recruit her." "No, you could have. Her skill set is precise, and we have gaps she would close directly." "Yes," Dante said. "And the leverage, yes," he said. "I know what it was." She looked at him. "Why didn't you use it?" He looked at the screen. Dom watching his crew, the way a man looked at people he had built something real with, which was different from the way a man looked at people he was managing. "She was building something," he said. "She chose quiet. She made the choice cleanly, without asking anyone's permission, and she built a life from it." He paused. "I'm not going to pull someone out of the life they chose because they'd be useful to me." Fernanda looked at the screen. She looked at Dom's face in the footage. "Your father would have taken her," she said. A reference point, not an accusation. The factual acknowledgement of a distance that had been traveled. "Yes," Dante said. "I know." "The correct choice," Fernanda said, "isn't always the operationally optimal choice." "No," Dante said. "That's how you know it's the correct one." He paused the footage. Dom's face held still on the screen, the quality of presence Dante had been studying since Rio, the destination the notebooks had been mapping since the first page. In the secure archive on the 3rd floor, a folder labeled with Hanlu's name sat in the dark. Waiting. 3 weeks later, Yara found something that made her sit forward in her chair at 2 a.m. and stay there for a long time. Not an attack. An architecture signature, an encrypted satellite communication system appearing at the edge of one of the Family Eye's monitoring bands. Carrying the fingerprint of a builder who worked at a level that made her look at it for a long time before doing anything else. She knew the methodology, not the specific tool. The design philosophy, the way it structured its encryption layers. The fingerprint of someone trained in the same generation of distributed communications theory she had been trained in, who had arrived at different conclusions from the same starting point. Someone had built a parallel system to hers. Not identical. Parallel, the same intellectual lineage producing different instruments. She spent 4 days tracing the architecture's provenance before she told Dante what she had found. An encrypted multi-hop relay network, she said, 12 nodes across 3 continents. Whoever built this was working at state-sponsored infrastructure level. She brought up the provenance chain. It's been operational for at least 3 years. The traffic patterns show consistent use across multiple theaters. "Who's running it?" Dante said. "That took 4 days," Yara said. "The network is designed to be operator invisible, no identifying information in the architecture itself, but traffic analysis over time produces patterns. Behavioral signatures. The operator has consistent methodological preferences that appear across multiple communication events." She paused. "Over 6 months of passive monitoring, I've built a profile of the operator from those preferences alone." She brought up a separate document. Not a name, not a photograph, but a behavioral map. Methodology. Operational patterns. The intellectual fingerprint of someone whose approach to systems architecture was visible in every decision the network made. "She calls herself Cipher," Yara said. "The name appears in her own internal designations. She chose it herself." She looked at Dante. "She's been building towards something large. The network traffic has been in a collection phase for the past year. Patient, accumulating intelligence across multiple theaters simultaneously." Dante looked at the behavioral map. He thought about the screening room and the vault footage and the 57 viewings and what it meant to study someone without their knowledge. To build an understanding of them from the outside in. to know the shape of a mind from the decisions that mind made. He thought about Dom's face in the frozen frame, the destination he had been moving toward. He thought about what Cipher was building toward, and why, and for whom. Flag at the moment the collection phase shifts to execution, he said. Already running, Yara said. He opened his notebook. He began a new section. The behavioral map on Dante's workstation grew over 8 months. Yara's monitoring architecture read Cipher's communications with the patience of a system designed to be patient, not rushing toward conclusions, allowing the pattern to develop fully before treating any element as confirmed. Impatient analysis found what it was looking for. Patient analysis found what was actually there. What was actually there, by month 6, Cipher had identified the Toretto family as her primary operational target, and was building a multi-theater play that would use the people Dom loved as leverage against his capability. The play required long preparation, the kind of architecture that only made sense if you were planning to need it to hold under sustained pressure. She was building a cage. She had been building it for 2 years. And she had not yet noticed the monitoring flag that had been reading her traffic since the month after the London operation. Dante did 3 things with the 8-month window. The first, he sent DK to Singapore. A private aviation facility there operated a fleet of corporate charter aircraft. One aircraft in the fleet was an identical configuration to Cipher's primary mobile command platform. Same manufacturer, same variant, same avionics package, same interior layout. DK spent 4 days at the facility under a foundation cover. He photographed every compartment, every access point, every system panel. The photographs came back to Sao Paulo and went onto a board in the Pinheiros building's secure room. Not a scale model. A full spatial map of the aircraft's interior. Every access route charted. Every holding area identified. If Dante needed to know where something would be kept on that aircraft, the board had the answer before the question was asked. The second thing required a conversation with Fernanda about a federal authorization process that used institutional channels she had not previously been asked to access. She listened to the full context, asked 4 questions, and then said, "This requires Brian O'Connor's administrative system access." "Yes," Dante said. She looked at him for a moment, processing the weight of asking a man who had retired from operational life to process something operational in its nature. "He'll want the full picture," she said. "He won't sign anything he doesn't fully understand." "I know," Dante said. "Give him the full picture." Brian O'Connor had walked away from the operational world at the end of the Shaw operation and built a life on a coast in California with Mia and their children. By all available intelligence, genuinely peaceful. He had kept one federal administrative access credential, active through nobody's institutional architecture. A standing arrangement that allowed him to process specific categories of operational authorization when Dom's family required institutional cover. He processed the weapons authorization after 3 days of review and 2 conversations with Fernanda in which she answered every question with complete information. He signed it as a deterrent instrument rather than an offensive one, a distinction that mattered to him and that the documentation supported. The authorization entered the federal system. It sat there, inactive, waiting. The third thing Dante did was simpler and took less time than the other 2. He made sure Brian still had the 4 keystrokes that could activate it. The encryption cycle tightened on a Thursday in the 8th month. Yara flagged it at 0340, the shift from collection to execution, visible in the relay node reduction and the communication frequency increase and the behavioral signature of an operator who had finished preparing and was beginning to move. She called Dante at 0400. He was already awake. He had been watching the behavioral map on his screen, feeling what he felt when a long calculation was about to reach its verification. Not anticipation exactly, not dread, but the particular alertness of someone who had been preparing for a specific moment and was now in it. "She's moving," Yara said. "Yes," Dante said. "How long?" "The execution window opens in approximately 72 hours. The target confirmation matches the pattern we've been watching." She paused. "It's Dom's family." "I know," Dante said. "Get the crew ready." He put the phone down. He looked at the board in the secure room, the aircraft interior mapped in photographs, the authorization in the federal system, Brian's 4 keystrokes on a phone in California. 8 months of preparation, assembled in the sequence that the behavioral map had told him was necessary. He thought about the vault footage in 1.3 seconds, and what it meant to spend years preparing for a single moment. Build the 10,000. The bridge will come when it comes. The bridge was here. The attack signature arrived at 0314 on a Wednesday, and Yara was already awake. 3 of the Family Eye's monitoring nodes hit simultaneously, at intervals of 340 milliseconds, the timing pattern of an automated intrusion system designed by someone who understood that sequential probes produced detectable sweep signatures, while simultaneous sub-second probes read to most. Monitoring systems as coincident environmental noise. Most monitoring systems. Yara looked at the probe signature for 4 seconds. Then 4 more, because it was worth the additional 4 seconds. She knew the builder, not the specific tool, but the design philosophy. The fingerprint of someone trained in the same generation of distributed communications theory she had been trained in, arriving at different conclusions from the same starting point. She had been built on a version of this methodology. The tool attacking her network had been built on the same intellectual foundation. She reached for her coffee and began to work. The honeypot had been part of the Family Eye's architecture since its first operational week. Yara had not explained it during the design briefing. Not because she was concealing it, but because it required operational context to understand. She had built a false architecture alongside the real one, with the deliberate attention of a woman constructing a trap that needed to be convincing enough to hold a very intelligent adversary. The false architecture looked exactly like the real Family Eye from outside. Same node distribution, same access patterns, same monitoring signature. It processed real data, a delayed feed, 72 hours behind the actual monitoring layer, which meant intelligence extracted from it was accurate in category and false in currency. An adversary inside the honeypot believed they were reading the Family Eye. They were reading a museum exhibit. The real Family Eye sat behind a secondary layer that the honeypot's existence actively concealed. Not through encryption, which was breakable, but through architecture, which required knowing the architecture existed before you could look for it. Cipher's attack found the honeypot in 11 seconds. Yara watched it go inside with the attention she gave to elegant work, acknowledging the elegance before beginning to work against it, because elegance deserved acknowledgement regardless of source. She gave it 4 minutes, long enough for the attack to commit fully, to engage all active components, to route all operational bandwidth into the extraction, to open the maximum possible surface area of its own infrastructure in the process of taking what it believed it had found. A tool committed fully to an extraction opened a door at its own back. She walked through it. The lateral movement took 23 minutes and produced a complete map of Cipher's operational reserve fund structure, the liquid capital she maintained for rapid deployment against active operations. Elegant architecture, built over years, transaction histories that looked organic rather than constructed. Elegant, she acknowledged it. Then she worked against it. The target account held $47.2 million. Yara moved it in 11 transactions across a 40-minute window, each transaction sized and timed to fall below the automated monitoring thresholds in the correspondent banking chain. The transactions moved through 4 intermediary structures before reaching a staging account in an Estonian digital banking entity the dynasty used for exactly this category of receipt. Extraction complete at 0517. She let the attack tool withdraw, believing it had succeeded. The withdrawal carried information she wanted Cipher to have, specifically that the operation had succeeded. This would delay Cipher's discovery of its actual outcome. She called Dante at 0531. He arrived at the Pineros building at 0623, the city outside still in its gray-gold pre-morning state, the expressway building toward its daytime volume. He read through the complete documentation, the financial architecture map, the extraction records, the account balances. When he finished, he looked at the number. $47.2 million. He looked at it for a long time with the attention he gave to decisions that required complete clarity before they could be made correctly. Then he looked at Yara. "Good work," he said. 2 words. The accurate allocation. "What do you want to do with it?" she said. He had been thinking about this since the expressway. Not the operational options, those were straightforward. The precise use. The money was real. Cipher's operational capital was real. The question was what conversion honored the nature of what had just happened. Orphanage network, he said. Rio, the consortium covering the North Zone and the hillside communities. Processed through a foundation intermediary, publicly filed, tax documented. He paused. "I want to name it." "Name what?" Yara said. "The initiative it funds." He looked at the screens. "I need to make a call first." Dom answered on the second ring. Dante told him everything. The honeypot, the extraction, Cipher's $47.2 million sitting in a foundation staging account. He told Dom what he intended to do with it. Then he told him what he wanted to name it. The line was quiet for a long time. "Brian doesn't know yet," Dom said. "No, I wanted your answer first." Another pause. Dante waited. "He walked away from the operational world to build something real," Dom said finally. "That choice cost him more than anyone outside the family understood. He had to leave behind a version of himself to do it." A pause. Naming $47.2 million of Cipher's operational capital after that choice, after what he gave up rather than what he held on to, Dom stopped. "Yes," Dante said. "He's going to want to know how you got this number," Dom said. "Tell him everything," Dante said. "He deserves the full picture." "Yeah," Dom said. "He does." A pause. "Do it." Dante ended the call. He looked at Yara. "The Brian O'Connor Legacy Children's Education Initiative," he said, "established through the Reyes Foundation. In honor of a man who chose family over everything the operational world offered him and built something real with what he chose." The room was quiet for a moment. Yara looked at him with the expression she used when something exceeded the operational category she had been using to analyze it. "Cipher targeted his family," she said. "And you're putting her operational capital into an initiative in his name. The inversion needed to be complete," Dante said, "not partial." Fernanda appeared in the doorway. She looked at the amount on the screen. She looked at Dante. She said nothing. Cipher found it on a Friday. The query arrived at 11:47, routed through 4 anonymizing nodes, arriving at the Foundation's tax registration database, pulling the complete record of the Brian O'Connor Legacy Children's Education Initiative. The query ran for 6 minutes. It pulled the same record 3 times. Then a secondary search, Brian O'Connor. Then tertiary, the relationship between Brian O'Connor and Dominic Toretto. Then a 4th search, for Brian O'Connor's current location, not his death record, his current location. Yara's annotation to Dante reads simply, "She understands. He's alive. She knows she's been answered." In a mobile command center whose location the family eye had been narrowing for 11 weeks, Cipher sat in front of the donation receipt and said nothing for a long time. Her technical lead ran the withdrawal trace for the 3rd time. Same result, lateral intrusion through the attack tool's own infrastructure, executed during the 40-minute window when the attack was engaged with a target that had turned out to be a mirror. The extraction conducted with precision, the lead described as the cleanest financial counter-operation she had encountered outside state-level work. "The family eye," Cipher said. "We hit a honeypot," the lead said. "The real architecture is behind it. The design philosophy, the closest analog I can find is the distributed network from the 2009 Mossad Cyprus operation. No central node. Impossible to take down by attacking any single component. The builder was trained in the same generation of distributed theory as the person who built our relay network." Cipher looked at the donation receipt. Brian O'Connor Legacy Children's Education Initiative. A tribute to a man who chose family over everything. Funded by a single donor contribution of $47,200,000. The man the initiative honored was alive. In California with his wife and children, living the life he had chosen when he walked away from the operational world. Dante Reyes had taken $47.2 million of her operational capital and put it into children's education in Rio de Janeiro, named it after a man who had chosen family over everything the operational world offered, and filed it publicly where she would find it. Not to defeat her, not to threaten her, to answer her. She had built her operational career on the principle that every actor had a comprehensible motivation. You mapped the motivation. You built strategy against a comprehensible adversary. She looked at the donation receipt for a long time. She reached forward and opened a new file. Not a tactical response. Not an operational plan. A threat assessment, a document she wrote only when an actor had demonstrated the capacity to change the shape of the problem she was solving. She had written one for Dom Toretto. For nobody's organization. For Brian O'Connor, before he retired. She opened this one to a blank page. She wrote the name at the top, Reyes Dante. She sat with the blank page for a moment. She began to write. In Sao Paulo, Dom called Brian at 0900 California time. Brian answered from the garage, the sound of it coming through the line. The particular atmosphere of a working space that was also a thinking space. The same quality as Dom's garage in a different geography. Dom told him everything. The honeypot. The extraction, the $47.2 million. The name. The line was quiet. He named it after my choice, Brian said. Not a question. Working through it. Yeah, Dom said. Another pause. Longer. Dom let it run. I want to talk to him, Brian said. I know, Dom said. You will. Dom put the phone down. He looked at the charger in its position, the tools on their boards, the bay door open to the California morning. He thought about a bridge in Rio and a man who had stood at the railing while everything fell and made a decision about who he was going to be. He thought about Brian in the garage down the coast, sitting with the knowledge that $47, $2 million of Cipher's operational capital had just been converted into a legacy initiative in his name by someone who had studied the family well enough to understand what Brian's choice had cost and what it had been worth. Dom picked up his phone. He texted Dante. He wants to talk to you. When you're ready. The response came back in 4 minutes. Tell him whenever he's ready. I'm here. Dom looked at the screen. Then he put the phone down and picked up the diagnostic tool. The charger's fuel system was telling him something was developing. He had been putting it off for 2 days. He would find it now. He got back to work. Cipher's 3-theater attack activated on a Thursday at 0600 GMT, and Dante was already awake. The Pinheiros threat stack had been showing elevated probability on a coordinated action for 11 days, the tightening encryption cycle. The relay node reduction, 3 personnel movements in Cipher's European network, with no coherent operational explanation unless they were pre-positioning for simultaneous multi-theater deployment. He had shared the assessment with Yara on Monday. She had agreed and spent the intervening days hardening the dynasty's exposed infrastructure. She had also, without being asked, flagged the same indicator pattern against the Toretto family's known operational theaters, noting in her annotation that Dom's crew would face the same threat vectors with less preparation time because their monitoring architecture was not the family eye. Dante had been considering how to handle this for 4 days. The attack resolved his consideration. 3 theaters, calibrated with the precision of someone who had been planning for months. Western Theater, Dom's crew's California base, targeted through a digital intrusion against the communications infrastructure Brian's federal architecture used for crew coordination. South American Theater, the dynasty's foundation financial network, targeted through the adapted methodology Cipher had rebuilt after the honeypot failure. She had learned from losing. She had come back better. European Theater, the shared financial infrastructure both families had been using through the Cayman routing. The legacy of the Bermondsey operation. Cipher had identified the alliance. She was attacking it at the 3 points where its architecture was most distributed and therefore most exposed. Dante read Yara's real-time assessment at 0614 and made 2 decisions before he reached the end of the document. First, the dynasty's response to the South American and European theaters. 4 words through the operations channel. Full counter. Full authority. Second decision required a different kind of communication. He picked up the phone. He called the relay number Dom's crew used for third-party coordination, held in the dynasty's contact architecture since Bermondsey, not called until now. 4 rings. Reyes, Dom's voice was the voice of a man who had been awake before the call arrived. You're seeing it, Dante said. 3 theaters. Yes, she identified the alliance and is moving against the overlap points. Your communications infrastructure is the Western Theater target. She's been in the digital layer for approximately 20 minutes. Tej is on it, Dom said. Good. The European layer is the critical exposure. She's using the Cayman routing as a tracing thread. She found the Bermondsey connection and worked backward. If she maps the full structure of the routing before we close her access, she has documentation on the alliance's financial architecture. A pause. That's the target, not the money. The documentation. Dom was quiet, not processing unexpected information but confirming an assessment already arrived at independently. You've been watching her build toward this, Dom said. 11 days of indicators. I should have called earlier. You're calling now. A pause. Come here. Dante looked at the operations room, Yara running the South American counter, Fernanda on the European coordination channel, Gabriel running a precautionary perimeter assessment. The dynasty was handling its theaters. 14 hours, Dante said. I know, Dom said. Bring your crew. The joint communications protocol took 48 hours to build, and Ramsey and Yara never discussed who was leading the construction. This was the efficiency of two people who had been working toward the same technical solution from different directions and discovered, upon meeting, that the solution was identical. Not similar, identical at its core, with implementation variations that were the product of different tool sets rather than different thinking. The same intellectual generation, the same foundational training in distributed communications theory. Two independent minds arriving at the same conclusion, because it was the correct conclusion. Ramsey had built Dom's crew's communications infrastructure on a distributed node model with redundant authentication. Yara had built the dynasties the same way. The two systems connected in 4 minutes when Yara ran the integration test. Your key rotation interval is 37 minutes, Ramsey said. Yours is 41, Yara said. Both prime numbers. Neither of them standard. They looked at each other across the workstation. Two technical operators recognizing each other at the level where recognition actually lived, which was not the surface level. 94 minutes, Ramsey said. LCM, joint rotation interval. I was going to say 94 minutes, Yara said. They had been working together for 6 hours. Both would later describe this exchange, separately to their respective principals, as the moment they understood the joint protocol was going to be better than either system it replaced. Neither described it as anything except a technical observation. Both of them meant considerably more than that. The Toretto house in Los Angeles had a late afternoon light that the footage had not fully communicated. Dante had seen it documented, the angle coming through the side yard, the warmth it carried into the driveway and across the porch. He had understood it as a visual characteristic of the location. Standing in it was different. The footage was two-dimensional, and this was not. The light fell across the concrete in the garage door and the front of the property with the accumulated warmth of something that had been arriving at this address for 30 years and knew exactly where it was going. He stood in it for a moment before he knocked. DK had parked the vehicles in the street. The crew had deployed without instruction into a configuration that was professional without being tactical, visible, non-threatening, the posture of people who understood they were guests. Dante had not specified this. He hadn't needed to. The crew had been watching him build the dynasty's relational architecture long enough to understand it at the behavioral level. Dom opened the door before Dante knocked. He looked at Dante. He looked at the crew in the street. He looked at the gold-trimmed Koenigsegg at the curb. "You're going to get parking tickets," he said. "I know," Dante said. "I'll pay them." Dom stepped back from the door. The table was already set. This was the thing that stopped Dante in the kitchen doorway, the unremarkable fact of a table set for more people than were currently in the house. Dom had anticipated the crew before he knew how many were coming, and had set it to the number he expected rather than waiting to confirm. He had set 7 extra places. Dante had brought 6 crew members. The 7th place was for whoever arrived without notice. There was always a place for whoever arrived without notice. Dante looked at the table for a long time. He had been studying Dom's family building for 3 years. He had read the favela safe house planning footage, the Rio Riverbank footage, the 57 viewings of the vault sequence. He had written 214 notebook entries about the mechanism and the principle and the technology. He had never seen it expressed in something as simple as a 7th place setting. The study had told him what the destination looked like from the outside. This was what it looked like from inside, a table with an extra place, set by someone who had made the decision to have room for whoever arrived so long ago that the decision had become automatic. Mia came through from the backyard carrying a serving dish, with the efficiency of someone who had been feeding large and variable numbers of people for long enough that the logistics were entirely automatic. She looked at Dante with the assessment of a woman who processed strangers through criteria that had nothing to do with institutional affiliation and everything to do with whether they were going to be honest at the table. She set the dish down. "Sit wherever," she said. Both crews at the table produced the layered noise of 2 groups finding their way toward the register that would eventually become comfortable, the early period of a gathering before it settled into itself. Gabriel found Roman within 4 minutes. The 2 of them in the same room were a social weather system, loud, precise about nothing in particular, and genuinely funny in the way that didn't require shared history, because the humor was grounded in an accurate read of the room. Everyone at the table understood it. Everyone at the table was funnier for it. Tej and Yara continued the European theater counter-operation in person with the added efficiency of being able to share a screen rather than describe it. This resolved 3 coordination problems they had been working around for 6 hours. Neither acknowledged the relief directly. Both worked faster. DK sat across from Han. Neither spoke for the first 10 minutes. They ate with the focused attention of people who communicated better through presence than through words. By the end of the meal, they had established a rapport, whose depth would have taken most people 3 conversations to reach. Valentina and Letty were in the backyard. Dante did not know what they were talking about. He had learned that certain conversations happened best when the principal was not present, and that a leader's job in those moments was to be absent correctly. Dom sat at the head of the table and watched his combined family with the quality of attention that the vault footage had shown Dante 57 times. The footage had not captured it fully. The footage was two-dimensional, and this was not. A man who had built something real. Watching the proof of it, carrying the weight without being crushed by it, because the weight was what he had been building toward all along. Dante watched Dom watching the table and understood something no amount of footage study had produced. The face in the frozen frame at the Rio riverbank. He had been trying to understand it for 3 years. He was looking at it now. The operations reports came in clean on all 3 theaters as the dinner wound through its later hours. Yara had closed Cipher's access to the South American infrastructure within 40 minutes. Tage cleared the Western theater intrusion in 22 minutes. The European routing documentation was secured before Cipher's tracing thread could complete its map. All 3 theaters held. Dante stood at the porch railing afterward and looked at the yard. The table was still full behind him, both families, the noise continuing, the gathering that didn't want to conclude. Dom came to stand beside him. The California evening air carried the quality of a coast that released its day's heat slowly, the temperature dropping in increments. The night arriving gradually rather than all at once. Cipher moved when she did because she saw us coming, Dom said. Yes, the Bermondsey operation changed her threat assessment. The counter-extraction accelerated it. Dante looked at the yard. She can see the shape of what we're building before we've finished building it. Then we need to finish faster. We need to finish correctly, Dante said. Faster is a way to make it wrong. Dom looked at him, the assessment running at depth without requiring surface expression. I've been thinking about how to do this since Rio, Dante said. He turned from the yard and looked at Dom directly. I've been studying the mechanism, trying to understand whether the understanding could become a blueprint. Dom said nothing. He was listening, the full quality of it. I'm standing in the answer, Dante said. He looked at both families at the table. This is what I was trying to build. You built something, Dom said. It's not the same as this. No, Dante said. It's not the same. He looked at Fernanda in conversation with Mia. 2 people who had found something in each other within the first hour and moved directly to substance. But I think they're the same shape. Dom looked at the fence on the property's south side, the section needing repair for 2 months, visible in the yard light. She's going to come again, Dante said. Harder when she does, both families need to be pre-positioned. Shared intelligence, shared communications architecture, joint operational planning established before the next move rather than improvised during it. Dom was quiet for a long moment. You came here to propose this, Dom said. I came here because you told me to, and because Cipher is moving, and because the table needed both families at it. The proposal is a consequence of the evening rather than the reason for it. Dom went inside. He came back with 2 beers, handing one to Dante without ceremony, the gesture of a man who had decided something and was expressing it through the most direct available means. Brian called me, Dom said. He drank his beer, about the initiative. I know, I told you to give him the full picture. He said the only way it could have been named that was if the person who named it understood what the choice actually was, not what it looked like from outside. Dom looked at the yard. How did you know? I watched Brian in that footage beside you for 3 years, Dante said. A man who had everything the operational world offers, capability, career, institutional gravity, and chose the table instead. He paused. I understood what that choice cost, and what it was worth. Dom looked at the yard for a long time. He cried, Dom said. Quietly, not performing it, simply making it, because it was the true thing and the true thing served the moment. Went outside for a while, came back and said it was going to fund something real. Dante said nothing. He did not need to add to this. They stood on the porch, both crews at the table behind them, the city running its permanent frequency past the fence line. The fence on the south side, Dom said. The crew expands, the perimeter expands. You'd need to know where the perimeter is. Dante looked at the fence. Then at Dom. "I'll send someone tomorrow," he said. Dom nodded once. Dante drank his beer. It tasted like arriving somewhere after a long drive, the relief of finding the destination real rather than approximated, the place itself rather than the idea of it. He had been calculating this moment for 3 years. The calculation had produced the conditions. The evening was its own. Cipher's mobile command platform had a tail registration the family eye had been narrowing for 11 weeks. The final confirmation came through a signals intelligence hit on the aircraft's avionics communication frequency at 0340, a brief maintenance transmission that used the aircraft's unencrypted identification band regardless of what encryption the operational communications carried. Because maintenance required ground staff to read the signal, and ground staff couldn't read encrypted bands. Yara had been watching for exactly this transmission across a 4-week window. The transmission placed the aircraft over the eastern Atlantic, inbound on a flight plan routing through Portuguese airspace. The route was the architecture of a flight plan designed to look like a commercial logistics transfer while positioning for operational deployment against a southern European theater. The southern European theater was the Cayman routing, the same routing Cipher had twice failed to map. She was coming back with a physical operation rather than a digital one. She had concluded that the digital approach against the dynasty's architecture was not viable. This was the correct conclusion. She had arrived at it faster than Dante had estimated. He shared the flight plan with Dom at 1400. Both crews were in the joint operations room in Lisbon by 1430, a commercial space in Parque das Nais that Fernanda had sourced on 12 hours' notice. Smelling of fresh paint and the electrical warmth of multiple systems coming online simultaneously. Ramsey and Yara had taken adjacent workstations. They had not been separated since the protocol build 2 days prior. The operational plan divided by capability and theater knowledge rather than by family identity. Eastern approach. Dynasty. The Foundation's 2 years of humanitarian partnerships and financial network legitimization in Southern Europe gave Dante's crew the local knowledge that was the difference between a clean approach and a contested one. Western approach. Dom's crew. Cipher's defensive architecture included a private security detail with counter-intrusion protocols that Hobbs's intelligence had documented across 3 previous encounters. Dom's crew had encountered 2 of those protocols directly and had built response methodology from lived experience. The Western perimeter was not the place for local knowledge. It was the place for people who had been hit by this specific adversary before and had survived the hitting. Convergence Point, a private aviation facility outside Setball, where the flight plan showed a 90-minute maintenance stop. Yara had 40 minutes of pre-positioning before the window opened. She used 39. Gabriel had been on the ground since 0620. He moved through the facility's immediate perimeter on foot, his preferred operational mode, the one that consistently produced the granular intelligence that vehicle-based assessment missed. He returned at 0651 with 7 pieces of information, 4 of which revised the pre-operational planning in ways that improved it. He had been on the ground for 31 minutes. Security rotation revised from the pre-op intel, he said through the channel. Primary checkpoint relocated 40 meters east of the documented position. 3-person rotation at the aircraft's forward access rather than 2. Forward access window is 31 minutes rather than 35. A pause. Eastern Service Corridor has an unsecured maintenance hatch the pre-op documentation didn't include. Diagrams in the channel in 4 minutes. The diagrams arrived in 3. DK ran the Eastern Vehicle approach at 0640, Valentina on the secondary platform. Dom's crew cleared the western perimeter at 0643, Letty on the primary approach vehicle, Roman running the communications relay for the western team. At 0647, both vehicles were on parallel approach corridors closing on the facility from opposite headings. The joint communications channel carried the combined operational picture for the first time in real conditions, both families' feeds running through the same protocol, producing a single composite awareness that neither crew had possessed alone. Ramsey said afterward it sounded like 2 orchestras discovering on stage that they had learned the same arrangement in separate rehearsal rooms. The convergence point was a service road along the facility's southern perimeter, and what happened on it at 0651 was not in any version of the operational plan. DK ran his approach at the speed his assessment had determined was correct for the road's surface condition, the vehicle's weight distribution, and the entry angle he needed for the facility's secondary gate. Dom's primary vehicle ran the parallel road 12 meters west at the speed Dom's assessment had determined was correct for his geometry. At the intersection 70 meters from the facility gate, they arrived simultaneously, not approximately, to the precision of the Joint Communications Channel's timing system, accurate to 200 milliseconds. They were at the intersection at the same moment. Both vehicles read the geometry identically. Both drivers made the same adjustment, a fractional throttle reduction at the apex, maintaining approach speed while creating 3 meters of lateral separation. The adjustment was not communicated through any channel. It was simply the correct response to the situation, made by two drivers who had spent their operational lives developing the instinct for what the correct response was. They passed through the intersection in formation. Neither of them mentioned it afterward. Gabriel and Roman's perimeter gambit developed in parallel without coordination because the operational situation produced the same solution from two different starting points. Gabriel had identified a security checkpoint on the facility's eastern access road, a checkpoint requiring credential verification, mobile position, not in the pre-operational intelligence. He had 30 seconds to resolve it before the approach window closed. Roman had identified the same checkpoint from the western perimeter assessment and had the same 30-second window. They arrived at the checkpoint from opposite directions. Gabriel in Portuguese, running a foundation infrastructure consultant with a maintenance appointment. Roman in English, running a DSS contractor credential that Brian's Federal Architecture had issued for exactly this category of operational need. The security officer looked at both of them. He chose Roman's credential, the federally issued one, higher institutional authority. Roman processed through. 20 seconds later, Gabriel processed through on the momentum of the same credential presentation. The social engineering principle that a checkpoint officer who had just granted access was cognitively positioned to extend that access to an associated party. Both of them reached the facility's interior perimeter at 0654. Gabriel said afterward, in the operations debrief, that he had never had a gambit resolved by someone else's gambit before. He had found it personally offensive to his professional autonomy and also extremely efficient. Roman said he had found it satisfying on both counts. The synchronized approach hit all three of Cipher's defensive layers in an 11-second sequence. Yara closed the electronic countermeasures at the moment DK and Dom's vehicles cleared the facility's secondary gate. The timing calculation had required the vehicles to reach the gate accurate to 4 seconds. They were accurate to 1.3 seconds. The physical security detail encountered Dom's crew and Gabriel simultaneously at the aircraft's forward access point. Two threats from convergent angles produced a response that was half correct in both directions, rather than fully correct in either. The operational security team's threat assessment registered the countermeasure failure and began its emergency isolation protocol. The protocol required 11 seconds. At the 9-second mark, Ramsey completed the extraction of the European routing documentation from the command center's isolated backup system, a system isolated from the primary network but not from the joint protocol's access layer, which Ramsey had positioned in its authentication chain 48 hours prior during what the aircraft's security log recorded as a routine firmware update query. The extraction took 6 seconds. The isolation protocol completed at 11 seconds. The sequence had closed before the system designed to stop it finished running. Both crews pulled back to the service road at 0706. The Portuguese morning had established itself fully, the sun clear of the facility's roofline, the Atlantic visible past the Setball estuary, the air carrying the salt and patience of a coast that had been receiving Atlantic weather for 1,000 years. The facility's response systems were active behind them. The incident report filed the following morning described a coordinated intrusion by an unknown party with significant technical capability and professional field presence. It described no families. Dom held the tablet with the documentation on the screen, the complete European routing architecture. Extracted, secured, he handed it to Dante without comment. Dante looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up. Both families in the morning light, having run the same operation at the same moment and arrived at the same result. He handed the tablet back. "She'll recalibrate," Dom said. "Yes, but she's recalibrating from a position she didn't expect to be in." Dante looked at the facility behind them. She modeled two separate families. "She's recalibrating against a single combined capability. That's a different problem for her," Dom said. "That's a different problem for anyone." Dom looked at the space on the service road where two approach corridors had converged at the same moment without instruction. He said nothing about it. He didn't need to. They flew to Rio because the meeting had to be in Rio. Not for symbolic reasons. Dante did not build meaning through symbolism, which had been his father's methodology and one of his father's several miscalculations. He chose Rio because the Foundation's most significant work was there, and because the proposal required Dom to see the work before he heard the document. The sequence mattered. Dom arrived at Galeo with Brian and Tej. They drove south into the city, not toward any building or operational center, towards Santa Teresa. The water system above Santa Teresa carried the sounds of working infrastructure on a Tuesday morning, the pressure hum of the distribution network, the splash of water at the community tap where 3 women were filling containers, a child running along the pipe access path with the ease of someone who had grown up treating the system's presence as simply the way the world worked. Marco Cavalcanti had expanded it twice. The community of 14,000 had become 23,000 served. The gold plaque still credited Marco Cavalcanti and the community organization, still did not mention Dante's name. Dom read the plaque. He looked at the infrastructure, the pipe network, the treatment facility, the maintenance access points clean and designed to be serviced by community members trained in the system's operation. He looked at the community around it, children in school uniforms at this hour, the market on the corner conducting its business with the focused efficiency of a place that had learned not to waste its operating hours. He looked for a long time without speaking. "How many?" Dom said. 47 infrastructure projects completed, 12 in active construction, approximately 190,000 direct beneficiaries, 16 medical facilities, 8 schools completed, 5 under construction. Dom looked at Marco Cavalcanti's name on the plaque one more time. "Your father took from these communities," he said. "A reference point, the factual anchor from which the current situation could be measured." "Yes," Dante said, "for 22 years. Dom walked back to the vehicle. Dante followed. The morning continued without them, the community tap running. The children heading toward school, 23,000 people living in the downstream reality of a decision Dante had made 3 years ago in a cafe in Botafogo, with a man who had arrived carrying 3 folders and a lifetime of disappointed expectations. The Accords document signed with the quiet weight of something that had become real in the moment of its completion. Brian's Federal Review cleared it. A private operational agreement between non-governmental entities. No criminal exposure for any signatory. Dom signed. Dante signed. The document sat between them with both signatures. 2 sovereign entities. A pact. The government not invited to the negotiation and not needing to be. 2 sovereign entities, Brian said from the doorway, phone still in hand. The government's not going to understand this for years. No, Dante said. That's probably fine, Brian said. He sat down. Then, after a pause, the pause of a man who had been deciding whether to say something and had decided. The initiative. He looked at Dante. "I've been trying to find the right word for what you did. I keep arriving at the same one." "What word?" Dante said. "Understanding," Brian said. "You understood what the choice was. Not what it looked like, what it was." He held Dante's gaze. Most people saw a man walking away from capability. You saw what he was walking toward. A pause. "Thank you." The room held this. Accurate, complete, requiring nothing added. Dante said nothing. Sufficient things didn't need addition. DK did not know why he had been asked to stay. The operational meeting had concluded. Tej had left with the document. Brian was at the window with his phone. Dom was still at the table. Dante was still at the table. DK sat at the table's end with the patience he had developed in the dynasty's first year, the capacity to wait for information until the information was ready rather than pulling it toward himself before it arrived. Dante opened the folder. He placed it on the table in front of DK with his hands flat on the surface after placing it, the gesture he used when delivering something that required the recipient to come to it rather than be brought to it. DK looked at the folder. He looked at his name on the tab. He opened it. The first page was a biometric confirmation document, confidence level 97.1%. The photograph was recent, unposed, the quality of a surveillance capture of someone who was not performing for a camera. The name on the confirmation document was Gisele Yashar. DK looked at it. He read it again. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the date stamp. 14 months ago. He turned the page. The location documentation. The current identity. The research facility. The contact information. the provenance chain showing exactly how the match had been found and confirmed, Yara's work. Presented with the precision of someone who understood that this document's recipient needed to know every element of how it had been produced in order to believe it completely. DK read through all of it, page by page. Slowly, he read it twice. Then he looked at Dante. His face had the quality that faces had when they contained something too large to organize into expression. Not the performance of feeling, but the actual thing preceding any decision about how to hold it. "She's alive," he said. "She has been since the airfield in Spain," Dante said. DK looked at the date stamp. 14 months, he said. Yes, the bay outside the window did what it had always done, the permanent quality of water that did not concern itself with what was happening in buildings along its edge. "You could have used this," DK said. The flatness of his voice was not anger, it was a man holding a fact at arm's length, because he needed to understand the mechanism before he allowed himself to feel what the mechanism produced. "When we first met. The parking structure. You had this 8 months before the parking structure. I found her 6 months before that," Dante said. "I went to Morocco. I told her someone missed her." He held DK's gaze. "I didn't ask for anything. I didn't make contact again." DK looked at the photograph for a long time with the attention he gave to things he needed to confirm were real before he allowed himself to respond to them as real. "Why didn't you use it?" he said. "Because it was yours," Dante said. "The information, the choice about what to do with it. It was never mine to use. I found it. It became mine to hold until the moment I could give it to the person it belonged to." He looked at DK directly. "This is that moment." DK looked at the folder. He looked at the photograph. He reached forward and closed the folder with both hands. The careful closing of someone handling something irreplaceable. He looked at Dom, who had been present the way Dom was present for things that mattered, completely, without announcing the completeness. Dom said nothing. He had nothing to add, and adding nothing was the correct response. DK looked at Dante. 8 months, he said. 8 months, Dante confirmed. DK stood. He picked up the folder. He held it with both hands, not ceremonially, but because the folder was something that required both hands, and his body understood this before his mind organized the reason. He looked at the bay window, the Podea car in the middle distance, the geography of a city that had produced the man who had held this information for 8 months and given it away in a conference room in Botafogo without asking for anything in return. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, the accurate allocation. He was not a person who added to sufficient things. He walked out of the conference room, the door closed behind him. Dom looked at Dante. The full assessment, the instrument Dom used for the category of evaluation that required the whole picture rather than a subset. "You held that for 8 months, he said. "Yes, and the leverage value." "Was significant," Dante said. "Yes, but you didn't." "No," Dom looked at the bay, the Podea car in the midday clarity. "I've been building the same thing you've been building," he said. "For 20 years. "I know," Dante said. "You built it in 3. I had a better blueprint," Dante said, "and more resources." Dom looked at him. The acknowledgement moving across his expression, not sentiment in the ordinary sense, but the recognition of someone who had spent 20 years being the standard, and was now in the presence of someone who had learned from the standard and built from it correctly. Presenting the result not as competition, but as continuation. In the corridor outside, DK stood at a window with the folder in both hands, looking at the bay and the mountain and the city below them. He opened his phone. He found the contact information in the folder. He stood at the window for a long time before he typed. "It's DK. I'm in Rio. Someone told me you might want to know I'm here." He sent it. He looked at the bay. He waited. The bridge closed to traffic at 1600 and opened to everything else by 1630. The evening came into it from the west, the sun dropping toward the horizon at the angle that the Guanabara Bay held before the hills caught it, spreading across the bridge's surface in the warm, flat light of a Rio evening that had decided to be generous. The smell of the city rose from below, exhaust and salt water, and the green particular smell of the hillside vegetation coming down on the late afternoon air. The smell of a place that had survived everything and was continuing to survive, and found this evening unremarkable in its survival, which was the highest form of resilience. The food arrived at 1615. The music arrived at 1620. The families arrived at 1625, from both directions simultaneously, Dom's crew from the western approach, Dante's crew from the eastern, converging on the bridge's center the way they had converged on the Setball service road, the way they had converged in the Bermondsey warehouse. The way two things built on the same principle tended to converge when given sufficient time and sufficient space. The convergence had not been coordinated. Fernanda noted this in the operations log under the category of outcomes that exceeded planning. Dante stood at the eastern railing at 1712 and looked at the water. The Guanabara at early evening held the light the way it held everything, with patience and without preference. The surface had gone reflective in the hour's angle, the city's shape visible in it as a distorted double. The real city above, and the water's version below. It had been doing this for as long as anyone in Rio could remember, and would continue doing it long after everything happening on the bridge tonight had become history. He had stood here before. The surveillance camera on the underside of the bridge's eastern span had recorded him standing here for 4 minutes and 23 seconds while his father's empire dissolved, and he had reviewed that footage in the Ipanema apartment on the 11th day. And the review had produced a legal pad with 2 words at the top and everything that followed from those words. The notebooks, the crew, the 47 infrastructure projects, the Bermondsey warehouse, the Setball service road, the document with 2 signatures on a table in Botafogo. He looked at the water for a long time. Still processing it? Dom's voice. Coming to the railing without sound, the movement of a large man who had spent 20 years learning that presence was not the same as noise. I come here sometimes, Dante said. I stand here and try to understand the distance between who I could have been and who I chose to be. It's a long bridge, Dom said. They stood at the railing, the water below, the city above, the table behind them carrying the full layered noise of both families assembled in one place. The sound of people who had been through enough together that their gathering had the ease of something practiced rather than the effort of something new. My father wanted a city, Dante said. He had it for 22 years. He built it on fear, and it lasted until 11 people decided not to be afraid. He looked at the water. I watched you on this bridge while he was sinking, and I understood something for the first time. Dom looked at him. That family is everything, Dante said. Not the infrastructure, not the capital, not the operational capability, the people who choose to hold. He turned from the water and looked at Dom directly, the full look, without the distance that professional register maintained between people who hadn't yet established the right to abandon it. You showed me how to own the world. Dom looked at the water. He looked at the city. He looked at the table behind them, both crews at the same surface, the noise of it carrying across the bridge in the evening air. I didn't want to own the world, he said. No, Dante said. But the principle you used to build what you built. The investment, the trust, the table, it scales. He looked at the hillside in the distance, the foundation's infrastructure invisible from here but present in the 190,000 people it served. I scaled it. With more resources and a different history. I arrived at something different from what you built. A pause. But I think they're the same shape. Dom was quiet for a moment. DK, he said. Yes, and Gisele. She had arrived 3 weeks after the conference room in Botafogo, not because Dante had asked, because DK had, and because Rio was where the work was, and because the quality of a life rebuilt from genuine choice was that it could be rebuilt again when a better choice presented itself. She was at the table now. 2 conversations east of DK, who was managing the distance the way a person managed the distance when something they had grieved was present and real, and required the patience of not consuming it all at once. The discipline of someone who understood that some things were worth approaching slowly, because the approaching was part of what made them real. You held the file for 8 months, Dom said. Yes, and the leverage value was significant, Dante said. Yes, Dom looked at DK and Gisele at the table, the geography of 2 people who had found each other again across a space that should have been permanent and was not. The difference, Dom said, is that I built it the only way I knew. You built it after watching someone do it first. He looked at Dante directly. The full thing. The complete instrument. Most people who watch someone build something spend their time figuring out how to take it apart. You spent your time figuring out how to build one yourself. Dante said nothing. Some acknowledgments were better received in silence. You want a beer? Dom said. Dante looked at him. Something crossed his face. Warmth, real, arriving without announcement the way real things arrived. Yes, he said. Dom went inside. He came back with 2. He handed one to Dante without ceremony. the gesture of a man who had decided something and was expressing it through the most direct available means. They stood on the porch of the bridge, both crews at the table behind them, the Guanabara below, the city in every direction. DK had drawn the start line in chalk at the bridge's center. He had been carrying the chalk since Bermondsey. Nobody asked why. The crew had collectively decided that certain things about DK were exactly the right size for what they were and required no explanation. The families arranged themselves along both sides of the center lane, chairs pulled from the table, the casual organization of people attending something important and attending it completely. Gabriel had produced a starting flag from somewhere. This also went unexplained. Dante in the Koenigsegg, Dom in the Charger. They sat in their vehicles for a moment before the start, both running the road, feeling the geometry, calibrating the instrument to the surface. The bridge's center lane was dry concrete, well maintained, the condition of infrastructure cared for correctly. It ran straight for a quarter mile before the bridge's natural curve began. Dom looked across at Dante. Dante looked back. "No tricks," Dom said. "No tricks," Dante said. He had been studying Dom's driving for 3 years. He had timed the hesitation intervals and measured the approach geometries and built his understanding of the standard from the ground up. He had then spent 3 years building his own capability toward it, on the roads of 4 continents, in the conditions that operational life provided. Not clean roads, but real ones. Surfaces with their own opinions about what happened on them. He did not know if he was faster. He was about to find out. The flag came down. What happened in the next 11 seconds was the specific quality of 2 drivers running at full capability. Not managed effort, not positioned racing, but the complete expression of everything each of them had built their driving toward across the length of their operational lives. The Koenigsegg's 1,500 horsepower inline-4 and the Charger's supercharged V8 produced entirely different sounds at full throttle, European precision and American muscle. 2 philosophies of power expressing themselves at full capacity in the same moment on the same road. The combination of those sounds running down the Rio Bridge, simultaneously in the way that things sounded when they couldn't be planned and couldn't be reproduced and could only be experienced once. The future and the tradition. Both of them, completely. Yara had a timing system at the finish mark. Tay Parker had a timing system at the finish mark. Neither had discussed this. Both had simply done it. Both systems showed the result at the moment both vehicles crossed the line. Yara looked at the numbers. She showed Ramsey. They looked at each other with the expression of 2 people who had spent careers working with precision measurements and had just encountered one that had produced something outside the range of expected outcomes. Same thousandth. Both cars stopped on the bridge's far side. Both drivers got out. They walked back to the chalk line and stood on either side of it, the line DK had drawn with the chalk he had been carrying since Bermondsey, the descendant of every line between them since the warehouse in London where this had begun. Dom looked at the timing numbers. He looked at the chalk. He looked at Dante. Dante looked at the numbers. He looked at the line. He looked at Dom. Dom held out his hand. Dante looked at it for a moment, the weight of the gesture, the full history of the bridge and the water and the legal pad and the Ipanema apartment and the notebooks and the 47 infrastructure projects and the Accords document and the folder held for 8 months passing through the geometry of this moment. He took it. 2 kings, Dom said. Same road. Dante looked at him. The warmth again, real, arriving without announcement, the 3rd time in the story in the fullest. "I thought you were going to tell me you let me win," he said. Dom looked at the chalk line. At the 2 cars parked side by side on the bridge's far side, the Koenigsegg's gold and the Charger's black against the Rio evening, the city's last light finding both of them and treating them identically. "Maybe I did," he said. He was not smiling. He was not smiling. Dante looked at the road. "Maybe so did I," he said. "My father built an empire on fear. I watched it fall in an afternoon. 11 people held it down, not because they were afraid, because they chose. I spent 3 years asking whether I could build what he couldn't. The answer was yes, but not the way he tried. You build something worth holding by giving people something worth holding. You earn loyalty by being someone worth being loyal to. That's not a strategy. That's the whole curriculum." The table continued behind them, DK and Gisele at the railing where Dante had stood. Not looking at the water, but at the city. The looking of people deciding what they were building toward rather than accounting for what they had come from. The distance between them was not really distance. It was the geography of two people who had found each other across a space that should have been permanent, learning slowly and without rush the territory of a world that contained each other again. Gabriel and Roman at the center of the table. The combined weather system of both of them in one conversation, producing conditions that everyone around them had simply incorporated into the evening's atmosphere. Loudness that was evidence of trust. 2 rooms worth of trust in the same space. Yara and Ramsey at the table's technical end, with a screen they were absolutely supposed to have put away an hour ago. They had not put it away. Letty had noted this once. They had registered the notation without modifying their behavior, which meant they had assessed the social cost and determined it was worth paying. Letty had decided this was correct, and had not issued a second notation. Fernanda with Mia, 2 women who had been running operational architectures for the people they loved, across different geographies with different instruments, finding in 3 months of working alongside each other the ease of people who had always known this conversation existed, and were glad to finally be having it. Not about operations, about the specific work of holding the people around you together when the holding required everything you had. Tej and Valentina in a conversation that had begun as professional courtesy and become the kind of exchange that happened when 2 people who thought about movement in the same primary language discovered each other. Han at the table's far end. Watching both families with the attention of someone who had been waiting to see this for a long time. The attention of someone whose waiting had been justified. The bridge. The water, the city below it and above it and all around it. Both families, both legacies. Dante Reyes had stood on this bridge for 4 minutes and 23 seconds while his father's empire dissolved, and had made a decision that the surveillance camera captured as stillness, but had been anything except still, the most consequential motion available to a person, which was the motion of choosing who to become. He had become this, the table, the families at it. The chalk line on the bridge and the dead heat at the finish, and the man standing beside him who had built the thing Dante had spent 3 years building toward. Looking at the city they were both responsible for, with the shared attention of people who understood that responsibility was not a weight, but an instrument. The instrument that converted capability into something worth having. Dante Reyes did not need a city. He had something rarer. He had the table. The case was closed. The end.